There was a moment somewhere in your childhood when you stood at the edge of the ocean and watched waves arrive. Maybe you were holding someone's hand. Maybe you'd just taken off your shoes and the sand was warm between your toes, or cold and wet, or perfectly smooth and cool. And the waves came in, one after another, rolling toward you with a kind of patience that felt eternal. Each wave rose from the flat water, gathered itself into a curve, rushed forward in white foam, and spread across the sand in a thin sheet that climbed toward your feet before retreating, pulled back by the wave behind it. You might have tried to count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, but then you lost track, because they kept coming. Because there was no clear beginning or end to the sequence, because each wave was both separate and part of something continuous. Maybe you jumped over them or let them wash over your ankles, feeling the pull as water retreated, the sand shifting beneath your feet, the strange sensation of the ground moving while you tried to stand still. Maybe you noticed how each wave was slightly different, this one larger, that one breaking farther out, another one arriving at an angle that created a sideways sweep of foam. But beneath the differences there was sameness. The rhythm continued. Wow! The waves kept arriving. They didn't pause, didn't stop to rest, didn't require anything from you except perhaps the simple gift of your attention. Something about this rhythm registered deep in your nervous system. Your breathing might have slowed to match the wave's tempo. Your shoulders might have dropped. The mental chatter that usually filled your head might have quieted, replaced by the simple observation of water arriving and departing in a pattern that had continued long before you arrived and would continue long after you left. This wasn't entertainment exactly. The waves weren't performing for you. They were simply doing what waves do, following physical laws, responding to forces that began miles away and hours ago, completing journeys that started with wind blowing across open ocean, transferring energy to water, creating swells that traveled toward shore until they met the resistance of shallow bottom and transformed into the breaking waves you watched. You didn't need to understand the physics to feel the effect. The rhythm itself was enough. The repetition was soothing, not because it was monotonous, but because it was reliable, predictable in its overall pattern while remaining varied in its details. Each wave was an individual event, but together they created a continuity that felt ancient, trustworthy, peaceful. You've watched thousands of waves since that first time. Maybe you've lived near the ocean, or maybe you've only visited occasionally. But the waves remain unchanged, still arriving, still breaking, still spreading foam across sand, still retreating and returning. They'll be there tomorrow. They'll be there years from now. They'll be there long after everyone currently alive has gone. The waves are still there now, somewhere, arriving on some shore. And tonight, as you begin to rest, you can remember that rhythm, that patient arrival, that endless repetition that somehow never becomes boring because it's the heartbeat of something vast. The pulse of an ocean that breathes against every shore. Waves are energy traveling through water, not the water itself. Moving, the water mostly stays in place, bobbing up and down as the energy passes through. What travels is the wave, the pattern, the disturbance moving across the surface like a ripple spreading from a stone dropped in a pond, except ocean waves can travel for thousands of miles before they reach shore. They begin with wind. Somewhere far from land, wind blows across open water. The friction between moving air and water surface transfers energy from wind to water. Small ripples form first tiny wrinkles on the surface. If the wind continues, these ripples grow into larger waves. The longer the wind blows, the faster it blows, and the greater the distance it blows across what sailors call the fetch, the larger the waves become. These waves, once formed, continue traveling even after the wind stops. They've absorbed energy, and that energy must go somewhere. It propagates outward from the storm or wind event that created it, spreading across the ocean as swells, long, smooth, rolling waves that can travel immense distances with very little energy loss. A wave generated by a storm off the coast of New Zealand can travel across the entire Pacific Ocean and arrive in California 5 days later. The water that forms that wave in California isn't the same water that was in the storm off New Zealand, its local water, California water. But the energy is the same energy transferred from water molecule to water molecule across thousands of miles, like a message passed from person to person, each person staying in place, but the message traveling on. This is why waves never stop. As long as wind blows somewhere on the ocean, and wind is always blowing, somewhere waves are being generated. And once generated, they travel until they encounter something that absorbs their energy. A shoreline, a reef, another wave traveling in a different direction. The waves arriving on any beach at any moment are the culmination of multiple weather events, multiple wind patterns, sometimes from different directions and different distances. They overlap, interfere with each other, create the complex pattern of waves that looks random, but is actually the sum of many regular patterns combining. There's something deeply calming about this. The waves aren't random chaos. They're the visible effect of wind events that happen far away, energy that has traveled patiently across open ocean, arriving at last at the shore where you're standing or resting or sleeping. They're messengers from distant places, carrying news of storms you never saw, winds you never felt, transferring energy that began as solar heating, creating pressure differences, creating wind, creating waves, creating the gentle sound you hear when you remember the ocean. Nothing about this process requires human attention. The waves form and travel and break whether anyone is watching or not. They've been doing this for hundreds of millions of years. Since Earth had oceans and atmosphere and wind, they'll continue doing it long after humans are gone. The waves are not for you, but they're also not against you. They're simply themselves, following physics, traveling through water, arriving endlessly at every shore. A wave breaks when it can no longer maintain its shape. This happens when the wave moves from deep water into shallow water, when the ocean bottom rises up to meet the surface, when the relationship between wave height and water depth reaches a critical ratio. In deep water deeper than half the waves, wavelength a wave moves freely. The circular motion of water particles extends downward, but the ocean floor is too far down to interfere. The wave travels unimpeded, maintaining its form, a smooth swell rising and falling with nothing to stop it. But as the wave approaches shore, the bottom rises. When water depth becomes less than half the wavelength, the wave begins to feel the bottom. The circular motion of water particles gets interrupted by the solid earth. Friction with the bottom slows the wave's base while the top continues at its original speed. The wave starts to change shape. Its wavelength decreases, the distance between successive waves shortens. Its height increases. What was a gentle swell becomes a steeper, more dramatic rise. The back slope of the wave becomes gentler while the front slope steepens. Eventually, the front becomes too steep to sustain itself. The top of the wave is moving faster than the bottom, and gravity takes over. The crest tumbles forward, creating the characteristic breaking wave-white foam churning water, the curl that surfers seek, the crash that creates the sound you associate with ocean shores. There's a kind of grace in this breaking. The wave isn't fighting or struggling. It's simply responding to changed conditions, adapting to new constraints. Where depth allowed it to maintain smooth form, it maintained smooth form. Where shallowness makes that form impossible, it transforms into something else: foam, turbulence, dissipated energy spreading across the beach. After breaking, the wave continues inland as a boreal sheet of water rushing up the beach slope, climbing as high as its remaining energy allows, then retreating, pulled back by gravity, and by the next wave arriving behind it. The energy that began as wind hundreds or thousands of miles away finally gets absorbed by friction with sand, by the work of lifting water up the beach slope, by heat generated through turbulence. The wave has completed its journey. The energy has been transferred one final time from water to land, from motion to heat and sound, and the subtle work of moving sand grains, reshaping beaches, carving coastlines, grain by grain. This breaking isn't failure, it's completion. It's the wave arriving at its destination, doing what waves do when they reach shore, transforming from organized swell to chaotic foam, from potential energy to kinetic energy to heat, from pattern to randomness, from structure to dissolution. There's a metaphor here if you want one. Sometimes maintaining form requires favorable conditions. When conditions change, when you can no longer maintain what you were, transformation isn't defeatite's adaptation. The wave doesn't cling to being a swell. It becomes foam without resistance, accepts the breaking, spreads across the sand, and lets the energy go. You can do the same. Let the day break into evening. Let wakefulness break into rest. Let consciousness break into sleep, transformed but not destroyed, changing form because conditions have changed, releasing the energy of alertness and becoming the foam of dreams, scattered and soft and perfectly natural. Sand is time made visible. Each grain is a fragment of something larger: a mountain, a cliff, a coral reef, a seashell reduced by weather and waves and chemistry to something small enough to fit between your fingers, smooth enough to flow like water, countless enough to cover entire coastlines. The process that creates sand is patient beyond human comprehension. Rain falls on mountains, water seeps into cracks in rock. The water freezes, expands, splits the rock into smaller pieces. Streams carry these pieces downhill. Tumbling through rivers, rocks collide with each other, breaking into smaller fragments, edges wearing smooth. Eventually these fragments reach the ocean. Waves continue the grinding work, rolling stones back and forth across the beach, against other stones, wearing them down further. The softer minerals erode away first. The harder minerals, typically quartz, resist longest, becoming the dominant component of most sand. Each grain has been tumbled for thousands or millions of years, shaped by countless collisions, reduced from boulder to pebble to grain. Some sand doesn't come from rocks. Some comes from life. Coral reefs are constantly breaking down, storms damage them, fish bite them, waves erode them. The fragments become sand, often white or pink because of their biological origin. Parrotfish contribute to this. They bite coral to eat the algae living within it, grind the coral in their digestive systems, and excrete fine coral sand. A single parrotfish can produce hundreds of pounds of sand per year. Other beaches have black sand, volcanic glass, and basalt. Fragments of lava that cooled quickly, shattered into sand-sized pieces. Green sand exists too, living crystals eroded from volcanic rock. Even purple sand appears in some places, manganese garnet, giving beaches an unusual hue. But regardless of color or origin, all sand shares the quality of being small, of being numerous, of being what remains after everything larger has been worn away. Sand is the distillation of landscapes, the powder that time produces when it grinds rocks in its patient mill. Walking on sand, your feet sink into billions of fragments, each one with its own history of formation and travel. The sand beneath you might contain grains that were part of mountains a million years ago, coral fragments from reefs that existed when humans were just beginning to walk upright, particles that have circled ocean gyres multiple times before washing up on this particular beach. Sand teaches something about persistence and impermanence simultaneously. Each grain persists for enormous periods of time, harder than human bone, more durable than most things humans make. But mountains become sand, cliffs become beaches. Everything large and solid eventually becomes small and scattered if you give it enough time and enough waves. This is simultaneously sobering and comforting. Nothing lasts in its original form forever, but the material continues, transformed, redistributed, becoming part of new configurations. The mountain doesn't disappear, it becomes a beach. The coral reef doesn't vanish, it becomes sand that other reefs will grow upon. You're walking on deep time when you walk on beaches. The sand remembers in its way, carries history in every grain, holds the past in forms so small you barely notice them. Rest on this foundation of transformed stone, knowing that change is the universe's way, that becoming something new doesn't mean ceasing to exist. The sound of waves has been studied for its effects on human nervous systems. It does something to us. This rhythm of crash and hiss, this pattern that repeats but never quite repeats exactly, this acoustic environment that fills the space but doesn't demand attention. Part of its power is rhythmic. The waves arrive at intervals not exactly regular like a metronome, but regular enough to create expectation, to establish pattern. Your nervous system detects this pattern, begins to anticipate the next wave, finds satisfaction when it arrives on schedule, finds interest when it arrives slightly early or late. The rhythm is predictable enough to be calming, varied enough to maintain gentle interest. Part of its power is acoustic. The sound of waves contains all frequency ace or white noise quality that masks other sounds, that creates an acoustic blanket covering the clicks and bangs and voices and mechanical noises that normally populate your environment. This masking is deeply restful. Your auditory system can stop scanning for meaningful signals, can stop trying to identify and interpret every sound, because the wave sound drowns out everything else, provides a steady sonic background that doesn't require processing. The specific sounds within wave sounds contribute too. The crash is percussive, a burst of broadband noise as water strikes water and entrains air, creating millions of tiny bubbles that pop and resonate. The hiss that follows is the sound of foam spreading across sand, bubbles continuing to pop, water sliding across millions of rough surfaces. Together they create a texture, an acoustic environment that's complex enough to be interesting, consistent enough to be soothing. There's also the quality of naturalness. The sounds aren't mechanical, aren't generated by engines or electronics. They're produced by basic physics, water moved by wind, interacting with air and shore, creating pressure waves that reach your ears. Something in your nervous system recognizes this as natural sound, as belonging to environments humans lived in for hundreds of thousands of years, as safe sound, as the acoustic signature of places where water is present, where survival is more likely than in waterless environments. This is partly why recordings of ocean waves help people sleep. The sound creates an acoustic environment similar to being at the beach, and human nervous systems respond by relaxing, by lowering vigilance, by allowing the shift from alertness to rest. The sound says you're near water, you're in a place humans have always rested, you're safe to sleep. The ocean is still making these sounds right now, somewhere, on thousands of beaches, on rocky shores, on barrier islands and coral atolls and volcanic coasts. Waves are arriving and breaking and creating this sound that no one is listening to but that continues anyway, that fills the air with white noise and rhythm, that marks the boundary between land and sea with an acoustic signature that has continued without pause since the first oceans formed and the first waves began to break on the first shores. You can hear it if you remember it. You can imagine it surrounding you, filling the space, creating an acoustic environment that tells your nervous system, rest now, you're safe, you're near water. You can let your guard down and sleep. Twice each day the ocean rises. Water climbs up beaches, fills estuaries, covers mudflats and rocky shores, creeping higher and higher until it reaches a maximum high tide, then pauses, balances for a moment, and begins to retreat. 6 hours later, the water is low again, exposing sand and rock and tide pools, reaching a minimum low tide before pausing and beginning the climb once more. This rhythm is the ocean's breathing. Slow, regular, predictable, driven by forces far larger than the water itself, but expressing those forces through gentle rise and fall, through advance and retreat, through the twice-daily cycle that organizes life along every shoreline. The tide doesn't rush. High tide doesn't arrive suddenly like a wave. Instead, water level changes gradually, rising or falling about a foot per hour in many places, slow enough that you can't see the motion if you watch for just a minute, obvious enough if you watch for an hour. The ocean breathes slowly, like someone sleeping deeply, like a patient inhale lasting 3 hours, a patient exhale lasting 3 hours, repeating endlessly, day and night, year after year. This breathing creates boundaries that shift. The intertidal zone, the area between high and low tide, is sometimes ocean, sometimes land, sometimes covered by meters of water, sometimes exposed to air and sun. Organisms that live here must cope with constant transformation, with conditions that change completely twice per day, with the ocean's rhythm dominating their existence. But the rhythm is reliable. High tide arrives on schedule, not randomly. Low tide can be predicted years in advance. The ocean's breathing follows patterns determined by celestial mechanics, by the positions of moon and sun, by forces that don't vary capriciously, that can be calculated and trusted. There's deep comfort in this reliability. The tide will rise, the tide will fall. The pattern will continue, whether you pay attention or not, whether you're present or absent, whether you care or remain indifferent. The ocean breathes, and its breathing creates a rhythm that life has adapted to for hundreds of millions of years. Your breathing is faster, 12 to 20 breaths per minute, hundreds per hour, thousands per day. But the principle is the same, regular rhythm, rise and fall, intake and release, the body's way of exchanging gases with environment, of maintaining balance through cyclical process. Perhaps this is why tides feel meaningful. They're breathing at a different scale, planetary breathing, the ocean's lungs filling and emptying with water instead of air, driven by lunar gravity instead of diaphragm contraction, but still breathing, still following the basic pattern of expansion and contraction, fullness and emptiness, arrival and departure. As you rest here, your breathing continues its rhythm. The tide continues its rhythm. The ocean rises somewhere, falls somewhere else, follows the moon's pull with the patience of something that has been breathing for billions of years, that will continue breathing for billions more, that breathes whether anyone is there to watch or not, that breathes simply because that's what oceans do when moons pull on them. The moon is pulling on you right now. Not strongly, you don't feel it, don't rise off your bed toward the sky, but the force is real, measurable, operating constantly. Everything with mass exerts gravitational attraction on everything else, and the moon's mass is substantial enough, close enough, that its gravity reaches across the 240,000 miles of space between moon and Earth, and tugs gently on everything here. Water responds to this pull more obviously than rock does, because water can flow, can redistribute itself, can move toward the source of attraction. The ocean on the side of Earth facing the moon experiences slightly stronger lunar gravity than Earth's center, does it's closer to the moon by about 4,000 miles, Earth's radius. This difference is tiny. The gravitational gradient is subtle, but it's enough. Water bulges toward the moon. Not dramatically, not like a cartoon, but measurably. The ocean surface rises by about half a meter on average, creating a tidal bulge, a region of high water on the side facing the moon. As Earth rotates beneath this bulge, different locations pass through it, experiencing high tide when they enter the bulge, low tide when they're 90 degrees away from it. The moon doesn't change position quickly from Earth's perspective. It orbits once per month, moving only about 13 degrees per day across the sky. But Earth rotates once per day beneath the moon, so the tidal bulge stays roughly aligned with the moon while Earth spins underneath it. The ocean doesn't rotate with the solid Earth, it's water, free to slosh and flow and maintain its orientation toward the moon, even as the seafloor rotates beneath it. This creates a kind of relationship, Earth and moon, solid rock and flowing water, spinning and orbiting, creating through their interaction the rhythm of tides that every coastal culture has lived by since humans first settled near shores. The moon's pull is gentle but persistent. It never stops, never varies randomly, never becomes unreliable. The force follows mathematics, obeys the inverse square law. Force proportional to 1 over the square of the distance creates effects that can be calculated centuries in advance with extraordinary precision. This reliability is what makes the moon's pull comforting rather than threatening. You can trust the moon to be where it should be, to pull with the strength it should pull with, to create the tides it's supposed to create. The relationship between Earth and Moon is ancient, stable, predictable, as close to eternal as anything in the solar system comes. The Moon has been pulling on Earth's oceans for over 4 billion years, since shortly after the Moon formed, since Earth cooled enough to have liquid water on its surface. The first tides rose and fell long before life existed. They continued through the emergence of the first cells, the first multicellular organisms, the colonization of land, the rise and fall of dinosaurs, the emergence of humans, and they continue now. Tonight, as you rest here, the moon pulls. The ocean responds. The tide rises or falls depending on where you are in the daily cycle. The relationship persists. Patient and reliable, older than mountains, more stable than continents, as close to permanent as anything about Earth can be. If the moon creates a bulge of water on the side of Earth facing it, why is there also a bulge on the opposite side, the side facing away from the moon? Why do most coastlines experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides each day instead of just 1 of each? The answer involves thinking about the Earth-Moon system as a whole. Not just Earth being acted upon by the moon, but both bodies orbiting their common center of mass point called the barycenter, located about 1,000 miles beneath Earth's surface, inside Earth but not at Earth's center. Both Earth and Moon orbit this barycenter. The Moon obviously orbits it swinging around in its monthly path, but Earth orbits it too, making a small circle each month, a wobble that would be visible from space, though we don't notice it because we're rotating with the planet. This orbital motion creates what's often called centrifugal force, the apparent outward force you feel on a carousel or when a car turns sharply. It's not a real force like gravity, it's an effect of being in a rotating reference frame. But it feels real, and it affects water. On the side of Earth facing away from the moon, this centrifugal effect is stronger than the moon's gravitational pull. The moon pulls, but the centrifugal effect pushes outward more strongly. The result is that water bulges outward on this side too, creating a second tidal bulge. So there are 2 bulges shown on the moon-facing side where lunar gravity dominates, one on the opposite side where centrifugal effect dominates, positioned on opposite sides of the planet, creating 2 high tides as Earth rotates beneath them. The geometry creates a beautiful symmetry. The tidal forces are balanced around Earth's center. The bulges are equal in size, opposite in position. As Earth spins, every point on the surface passes through both bulges once per day, experiencing 2 high tides about 12 hours apart, with low tides halfway between them. This pattern isn't perfectly regular because the moon orbits Earth in the same direction. Earth rotates, so the tidal bulges shift position slightly each day, making the interval between successive high tides about 12 hours and 25 minutes instead of exactly 12 hours. This is why high tide today occurs 50 minutes later than yesterday's high tide. The moon has moved in its orbit, and Earth has to rotate a bit extra to catch up. The sun also creates tides, though smaller ones, because although the sun is vastly more massive than the moon, it's also vastly farther away. And the tidal force depends on distance, much more than on mass specifically. It's proportional to the inverse cube of distance. Solar tides are about 45% as strong as lunar tides. When sun and moon are lingering new moon and full moon, their tidal effects add together, creating spring tides with higher highs and lower lows. When sun and moon are at right angles during quarter moons, their effects partially cancel, creating neap tides with smaller tidal ranges. The pattern is complex but predictable, mathematical but graceful, the result of multiple bodies pulling on each other across vast distances, creating through their gravitational dance the rhythm of rising and falling water that organizes life along every coast. The intertidal zone is neither fully land nor fully sea. It's the space between high tide and low tide, the region that water covers and uncovers twice each day, the boundary that shifts with lunar rhythm, the place where organisms must be equally comfortable underwater and exposed to air. At high tide, the intertidal is ocean. Water covers everything, the rocks, the sand, the mud flats. Marine creatures swim through, fish hunt among the rocks, waves roll across the submerged landscape. For 6 hours, this zone is indistinguishable from the permanent ocean just beyond it. Then the tide falls. Water drains away, flowing back toward the sea. Rocks emerge, draped with seaweed. Sand appears, marked with ripples from vanished waves. Tide pools form in depressions, isolated pockets of seawater, stranded by the retreating tide. The zone transforms from ocean to land, from submerged to exposed, from marine environment to something else something. amphibious, something that belongs fully to neither realm. The organisms that live here must handle both conditions. Barnacles close their shells at low tide, sealing moisture inside, waiting for water to return. They can survive days without submersion, protected by their shells, but they can't feed. They're filter feeders, requiring water to flow through their bodies. At high tide, they open again, extend feathery limbs, wave them through the water, capturing plankton, feeding while they can. Mussels do the same, close at low tide, open at high. Limpets clamp down against rocks, creating such tight seals that predators can't pry them off. Sea stars retreat to tide pools or under rocks where moisture persists. Crabs scuttle into crevices. Seaweeds lie flat against rocks, minimizing exposure, waiting for water's return. The intertidal is harsh in some waste temperature extremes, desiccation risk, exposure to sun and rain, and predators from both land and sea. But it's also productive, nutrient-rich from ocean mixing, sunlit, accessible. Organisms that can handle the twice-daily transformation thrive here in abundance. There's a lesson in the intertidal's adaptability. These organisms don't resist change. They accommodate it. They have strategies for both states, equipment for both conditions. When the tide is high, they're marine creatures. When the tide is low, there's something else, something more like terrestrial organisms, waiting and enduring until conditions shift again. They don't fight the tide. Resisting would be futile. The tide will change regardless. Instead, they adapt, close down during difficult times, open up during favorable ones, accept the rhythm as unchangeable, and work within it rather than against it. Your life has tides, two periods of high energy and low, times of abundance and scarcity, phases of engagement and withdrawal. The intertidal teaches that both states are survivable, that having strategies for both is wiser than expecting only one, that accepting rhythm and change and cycling between states is how organisms persist in dynamic environments. The tide is pulling back somewhere right now, exposing rocks, stranding tide pools, leaving organisms to wait for water's return. And elsewhere, the tide is coming in, submerging dry rocks, filling pools, allowing barnacles to open their shells and feed. The cycle continues, reliable and inevitable, creating a boundary that shifts but never disappears, a space between worlds where life flourishes through flexibility. The tides aren't always the same strength. Some tides rise higher and fall lower than others. The range between high and low varies through the month, following a predictable pattern connected to the moon's phases. During new moon, when the moon is between Earth and Sun, and during full moon, when Earth is between moon and Sun, the three bodies align. The Sun and moon are positioned either on the same side of Earth or on opposite sides, and their gravitational effects on Earth's oceans add together. The lunar tidal bulges and the solar tidal bulges coincide, reinforcing each other, creating larger-than-average tides. These are called spring tides, though the name has nothing to do with the season. The word comes from the German springen, meaning to jump, or lethe. Tides leap higher and sink lower during these periods. Spring tides occur twice per month, at new moon and full moon, creating the month's most extreme tidal ranges. During quarter moon's first quarter and third quarter, the sun and moon are at right angles from Earth's perspective. The lunar tidal bulges occur in different locations than the solar tidal bulges. Their effects don't align, and they partially cancel each other out. The high tides aren't as high, the low tides aren't as low. The tidal range is minimized. These are neap tides, from an Old English word meaning lacking or deficient. The tides lack their full strength, are deficient in range. Neap tides also occur twice per month during the quarter moons, creating the month's smallest tidal ranges. The cycle from spring to neap to spring again takes about 2 weeks, half a lunar month. The pattern is as reliable as the phases of the moon because it's driven by the same geometry that creates those phases, the changing alignment of sun, earth, and moon as the moon orbits Earth and Earth orbits the sun. Coastal communities have always known this pattern. Fishermen time their work to the tides, knowing when the lowest lows will expose shellfish beds, when the highest highs will float their boats over sandbars. Harbor masters know when ships can safely enter shallow ports. Beachcombers know when the tide will retreat farthest, exposing regions usually underwater. The pattern connects daily experience to monthly cycles, connects the ocean to the moon's phases, connects water on Earth to celestial mechanics, creating relationships across scales from the water at your feet to the moon, 240,000 miles away to the sun, 93 million miles away, all influencing each other gravitationally, all participating in the mathematical dance that determines when and how much water rises on each beach. There's something satisfying about this predictability. The tides aren't random or chaotic, they follow rules, obey mathematics, create patterns you can count on. The ocean rises and falls not capriciously but according to forces that can be calculated, that express themselves reliably, that create rhythm you can trust. This rhythm continues tonight, whether it's spring tide or neap tide where you are, whether the tidal range is maximal or minimal, whether the moon is full or new or somewhere in between. The pattern persists, the cycle continues, the tides rise and fall according to ancient mathematics, reliable as sunrise, patient as moonrise, steady as the breathing of something vast and alive and at peace. Sound moves through water almost 5 times faster than it moves through air, about 3,400 miles per hour compared to air's 767 miles per hour. This seems counterintuitive at first. Water is denser than air, so shouldn't it slow sound down rather than speed it up? But sound is a pressure wave, a vibration passing from molecule to molecule. In water, molecules are much closer together than in air, packed tightly, constantly touching. When one molecule vibrates, it immediately pushes its neighbors, which immediately push their neighbors. The pressure wave propagates quickly because there's no gap between molecules, no delay in transmission. Water is also less compressible than air. When a sound wave compresses water, the water pushes back strongly, maintaining the wave's integrity. In air, the molecules have room to spread out, which dissipates the wave's energy more quickly. Water's resistance to compression helps sound waves maintain their strength over long distances. The result is that the ocean is an acoustic highway. Whales can hear each other across hundreds of miles of open water. Before engine noise dominated the oceans, whale songs could travel even farther. Some researchers estimate that blue whales could communicate across entire ocean basins, their deep frequency calls traveling thousands of miles through the deep sound channel, a layer of water at about 3,000 feet depth, where temperature and pressure create optimal sound transmission. This acoustic richness makes the ocean a symphony, not silent at all, despite the human assumption that underwater is quiet. Instead, it's full of sound, clicking, whistling, moaning, grunting, rasping sounds produced by thousands of species for communication, navigation, hunting, attracting mates, warning rivals. Shrimp snap, fish grunt, whales sing, dolphins whistle, ice crackles as it breaks, earthquakes rumble through the ocean floor, volcanoes erupt underwater, sending booms echoing through the depths. Even rain hitting the surface creates underwater sound, a soft patter when rain is gentle. To humans, the ocean seems quiet because we're not adapted to hear underwater. Our ears evolved for air, where sound behaves differently. Put your head underwater and sounds become muffled. Directions become unclear. Voices become unintelligible. We're acoustically blind in water, unable to access the richness that marine mammals navigate with ease. But the sounds are there, filling the water with information, creating an acoustic landscape more complex than visual landscapes in many ways, because sound travels so far, because sources miles away can be heard as clearly as sources nearby, because the ocean doesn't have the visual barriers that limit sight. No trees, no hills, no walls, just water, transparent to sound, carrying vibrations from distant sources to create a three-dimensional acoustic environment. Marine mammals evolved in this environment. They're creatures of sound more than sight, navigating by ears more than eyes, communicating through water's excellent sonic conductivity, using the ocean's acoustic properties the way terrestrial animals use vision as their primary sense, their way of understanding where they are and what surrounds them. Right now, somewhere in the ocean, whales are singing, dolphins are clicking, shrimp are snapping. The water is carrying these sounds, broadcasting them across miles, creating a soundscape that no human hears but that fills the ocean with invisible music, with acoustic information, with the voices of creatures talking to each other in languages made of vibration and frequency and rhythm, transmitted through patient water. Humpback whales sing. Not just vocalize, they sing, creating complex patterns of sound that repeat, that have structure, that change gradually over years, that spread through whale populations like musical fashions, that serve functions we still don't fully understand but that clearly matter intensely to the whales themselves. Only males sing. They sing primarily during breeding season, hanging suspended in the water, sometimes for hours at a time, producing sequences that can last 20 minutes or more before repeating. All the males in one region sing approximately the same song. There are regional dialects, distinct repertoires that vary between ocean basins, but within a region, the whales share a common song. And these songs change. Gradually, over months and years, the whales modify their songs, adding new phrases, dropping old ones, changing the order of elements, evolving the song as a group. All the males in the region make similar changes, staying synchronized with each other, maintaining a shared repertoire even as that repertoire shifts. The sounds are haunting long, mournful moans, rising and falling whistles, rapid sequences of clicks, deep rumbles that can be felt as much as heard. The lower frequencies travel farthest, carrying for dozens or even hundreds of miles through the ocean, announcing the singer's presence to any whale within range. Scientists have theories about why humpbacks sing. Maybe it's to attract females, like birdsong in spring. Maybe it's to space males out, to establish acoustic territories, to say, I'm here, this area is occupied. Maybe it's competitive display, males trying to out-sing each other, demonstrating fitness through vocal complexity. Or maybe it serves multiple functions, like human music serves multiple purposes: communication, expression, social bonding, aesthetic pleasure. We don't know if whales experience their songs as beautiful, if they feel anything like what humans feel listening to music. We don't know if the singing is effortful or effortless for them, if they practice or if it comes naturally, if young males learn from older ones or figure it out themselves. But we know they keep doing it, year after year, dedicating hours to singing, investing energy in producing these acoustic displays that travel through the ocean, that other whales clearly respond to, that matter enough that the whales continue doing it despite the effort involved. There's something deeply moving about this. Creatures with brains, with consciousness we can't fully access, creating complex sounds for reasons we can barely guess, singing to each other across miles of dark water, maintaining traditions that pass from generation to generation, changing their songs gradually like human musical styles change, creating beauty, if we can call it beauty, without projecting too much, simply because that's what humpback whales do. The songs continue now, in winter waters where humpbacks gather to breed. Males hang suspended, alone or near other males, producing their sequences of moans and whistles and rumbles. The sounds travel through the water, reaching other whales, carrying information or emotion or display or whatever it is that whale songs carry. The ocean conducts the music faithfully, transmitting every nuance, every variation, every frequency, allowing whales to hear each other across distances that would make human voices inaudible. The ocean is full of songs humans never hear, music made by minds we barely understand, acoustic beauty created for audiences we can't join. But it's there, real and ongoing, filling the water with structure and pattern, and something that, even if it's not music in the human sense, is at least music in the whale sense, which is enough. Dolphins talk constantly. In groups they produce near-continuous streams of sound tricks, whistles, burst pulses, jaw claps, and acoustic environments so rich and fast that human researchers struggle to separate individual vocalizations to determine who's saying what, to pass the conversation from the overlapping cacophony. The whistles are perhaps easiest for humans to appreciate. Each dolphin develops a signature whistle, a unique pattern that functions like a name. When dolphins want to get a specific individual's attention, they produce that dolphin's signature whistle. The called dolphin typically responds with its own signature whistle, acknowledging the call. It's conversation. Hey, are you there? Yes, I'm here. But the whistles convey more than identity. Dolphins modulate them, vary pitch and duration, add tremolo and frequency shifts. Researchers have documented hundreds of distinct whistle types beyond signature whistles, suggesting a rich vocabulary of acoustic signals, though translating these signals into human concepts remains largely beyond current capability. The clicks are different, primarily for echolocation, the biological sonar the dolphins use to navigate and hunt. A dolphin produces rapid click sequences, sometimes hundreds per second, and listens to the echoes. Different materials reflect sound differently. Fish have a different acoustic signature than water. Air-filled swim bladders reflect strongly. Bones create distinct echoes. The dolphin's brain processes these returning echoes, constructs a three-dimensional acoustic image of its surroundings. This is seeing with sound, creating mental pictures from echoes. The dolphin doesn't just know something as a head it knows, there's something size, shape, distance, whether it's moving or still. Possibly even its internal structure. Echolocation provides detailed information, perhaps as detailed as human vision in some ways, though profoundly different in quality. Burst pulses are rapid click sequences that seem to carry emotional content. Dolphins produce them during aggressive interactions, during excitement, during intense social engagement. They sound like squeaky doors or rusty hinges to human ears, harsh and jarring, suggesting agitation or strong feeling. All of this happens simultaneously in dolphin groups, multiple dolphins whistling, clicking, burst pulsing, creating an acoustic environment of staggering complexity. How they parse this chaos, how they separate one dolphin's signals from another's, how they maintain individual conversations within the group, cacophony, remains mysterious. They clearly manage dolphins' coordinate hunting, maintain social relationships, raise young, navigate, all primarily through acoustic communication. There's something humbling about dolphin communication. These are minds operating in a sensory world profoundly different from human experience. They see with sound in ways we can barely imagine. They communicate at speeds and with overlapping complexity that human vocal communication can't match. They lack hands to point with, lack facial expressions as nuanced as apes, but compensate with acoustic richness that makes human speech seem almost impoverished by comparison. We share the planet with these creatures, intelligent, social, communicative beings who talk constantly to each other in languages we can record but barely understand, who navigate an acoustic world we can only dimly perceive, who have their own cultures and relationships and dramas playing out in the ocean, in the clicks and whistles and burst pulses that fill the water with meaning. Right now, somewhere, dolphins are talking. Their whistling names, picking at schools of fish, burst pulsing during social interactions, filling their corner of the ocean with sound, with communication, with the acoustic richness that is their primary way of being in the world. Despite the ocean's acoustic richness near the surface and in shallow waters, there are depths where sound is rare, where the ocean approaches true silence, where the loudest sound might be the occasional click of a hunting sperm whale or the distant rumble of an earthquake traveling through the sea floor. In the deep ocean, 3 miles down, 4 miles down, life is sparse. The darkness is absolute. The cold is extreme. The pressure is crushing. Food is scarce, arriving only as marine snow drifting from above, taking days or weeks to fall through the water column. In these conditions, organisms are few and far between, and sound production requires energy that's hard to spare. Many deep-sea fish lack swim bladders, the gas-filled organs that help shallow water fish control buoyancy, and that also serve as resonators for sound production. Without swim bladders, these fish can't produce the grunts and booms that shallow water fish create. They're mostly silent, drifting in darkness, occasionally encountering each other, living lives of profound quiet. The water at these depths sits in a temperature minimum layer where sound travels more slowly than in warmer or colder water. This creates acoustic shadows regions where sound doesn't penetrate well, where the ocean's normal acoustic richness fades, leaving near silence. But silence isn't absolute. The ocean floor isn't dead. Tectonic plates still shift, earthquakes still rumble through the crust, volcanoes still erupt, sending sound through the deep water. These sounds travel far because deep water has few of the boundaries and temperature variations that scatter sound in surface waters. An earthquake in one part of the ocean basin can be detected thousands of miles away as a low rumble, a distant vibration, the planet's crust adjusting itself. Whale sounds reach the depths. Blue whales and fin whales produce infrasonic call frequencies below human hearing that can travel through the deep sound channel, the layer where temperature and pressure create maximum sound transmission. These calls might circle entire ocean basins, reaching depths where no light penetrates, where the whales themselves never go, filling the abyss with low-frequency moans that are among the loudest sounds produced by any animal. But most of the time, in most places, the deep ocean is quiet. Background noise level is far below what exists in shallow water. There's no wave action, no rain hitting the surface, no snapping shrimp, no fish schools, just occasional sound. Sounds a whale's distant call, a tectonic rumble, the click of a hunting sperm whale miles away, heard through water that conducts but doesn't create sound. This quietness is profound. It's the acoustic equivalent of darkness, the absence of stimulation, the removal of input. For creatures adapted to this environment, the silence might be normal, might be their baseline. But for humans imagining it, the deep ocean's quietness can seem either terrifying or peaceful, depending on perspective. Either an empty void where nothing happens, or a space of profound rest, where the chaos of surface life can't penetrate, where stillness reigns, where silence is broken only by occasional reminders that the planet is still alive, still moving, still making the sounds that planets make when their crusts shift and their creatures navigate the dark. The loudest, continuous biological sound in the ocean comes from one of its smallest creatures. The snapping shrimp, a tiny crustacean, usually less than 2 inches long, that produces sounds so loud they can stun small fish, so frequent that they dominate the acoustic environment of tropical and subtropical reefs worldwide. The shrimp has an asymmetrical clawy claw much larger than the other, specialized for sound production. The claw has a plunger that fits into a socket. When the shrimp contracts the muscles controlling this claw, the plunger snaps shut at extreme speed. The claw closes in less than a millisecond, one of the fastest movements in the animal kingdom. The snap creates a cavitation bubble-eye void in the water where the pressure drops so low that water momentarily vaporizes. This bubble forms, collapses almost instantly, and the collapse produces an intense sound, a sharp crack that can reach 210 decibels louder than a gunshot. The bubble collapse also briefly produces temperatures approaching 5,000 degrees Celsius, nearly as hot as the sun's surface, though in such a tiny volume and for such a brief instant that it doesn't affect the surrounding water noticeably. One snapping shrimp is loud. Thousands of snapping shrimp on a reef create a constant crackling background, a sound like frying bacon or popping popcorn, loud enough to interfere with sonar, to dominate hydrophone recordings, to make reef environments some of the noisiest in the ocean. The shrimp use these snaps for multiple purposes. Stunning prey, they hunt small fish and worms, defending territory, communicating with mates, perhaps just announcing their presence. In some species, males and females live in monogamous pairs in burrows, and they snap at intruders together, coordinating their acoustic defense of their shared home. But snapping shrimp aren't the only small singers. Croakers and drumsfish families, named for the sounds they produce, use swim bladder resonance to create grunts and booms during spawning seasons. Toadfish produce boat whistle calls so loud they're audible above water. Even sea urchins have been recorded making sounds by scraping their spines. This small-scale acoustic richness creates a layered soundscape on healthy reefs. The bass notes are large fish and dolphins, the mid-range is smaller fish and urchins, and the high-frequency crackling that fills every gap is snapping shrimp, creating a continuous acoustic texture, an ambient sound that marks the reef as alive and active. Coral reefs are louder than open ocean, louder than sandy bottoms, sometimes even louder than busy harbors. The biological richness translates directly to acoustic richness, more species, more individuals, more sounds, creating a sonic environment of tremendous complexity. Researchers have discovered that this sound attracts settlers. Larval fish drifting in open ocean can hear reef sounds from miles away, use them to navigate towards suitable habitat, following the acoustic beacon that promises food, shelter, and company. The reef broadcasts its presence through sound, drawing in the next generation through acoustic advertisement. There's something wonderful about Thistony. Creatures creating sounds so loud they dominate entire environments, sounds serving multiple functions, sounds that organize communities and attract new members, sounds that make the reef not just a visual ecosystem but an acoustic one, rich with information and alive with communication at every scale, from the smallest shrimp to the largest grouper. When you look at the ocean from above, from a cliff or an airplane, or standing at the shore looking out over deep water, the color you see is blue, not the pale blue of tropical shallows that's reflected sky and white sand visible through clear water, but the deep saturated blue of open ocean, the color that seems to come from the water itself rather than being reflected from somewhere else. This blue is real. It's not an optical illusion, not reflected sky. The water itself is blue for the same reason that thick enough ice is blue, that glaciers are blue, that deep snow in a crevasse is blue. Water molecules absorb red wavelengths of light and allow blue wavelengths to pass through or scatter back. When sunlight enters the ocean, it's carrying all colors. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, all the wavelengths our eyes can detect. But water molecules and the dissolved salts in seawater interact differently with different wavelengths. They absorb red light strongly. Within the first 30 feet of water, most red light is gone, absorbed by water molecules that convert the light's energy into tiny amounts of heat. Orange disappears next, then yellow. By 200 feet deep, you're left primarily with blue and a bit of green. The red end of the spectrum has been filtered out, absorbed, removed from the light that continues downward, or remains as blue, which scatters in all directions, bounces off particles in the water, reflects off whatever it hits, and some of it returns to the surface, travels back through the water, emerges into air, and reaches your eyes. This is why the ocean is blue. You're seeing the wavelengths that survive the journey down and back up through water, the colors that water doesn't absorb efficiently, the blue that scatters and reflects and makes it back to your eyes to say, this is what I am, this is what water looks like, when you accumulate enough of it, when it's deep enough that the color of the bottom doesn't matter, when all you're seeing is water's own intrinsic color. Shallow water over white sand looks pale, almost colorless, because sunlight bounces off the sand and returns with most of its colors intact, only slightly filtered by the short journey through water. But deep water with no bottom in sight, no sand or rock to reflect light back unchanged, that water looks deeply, richly blue because every photon reaching your eyes has traveled through hundreds of feet of water, been filtered extensively, been stripped of red and orange and yellow, leaving only the blue that water permits. This same selective absorption happens in ice. Pure ice is colorless in small amounts. Ice cube is clear, but thick ice is blue. Look at a glacier's face, especially a freshly carved section where ancient ice is exposed, and you'll see intense blue, the color of deep water, for the same reason ice molecules absorbing red wavelengths, allowing blue to scatter and reach your eyes. The ocean wears its color honestly. The blue isn't painted on, isn't cosmetic, isn't borrowed from the sky. It's the ocean's own color, the shade that water chooses when given depth enough to express itself. The hue that results from water being water, from molecules doing what molecules do when light passes through them. The top 200 meters of the ocean, roughly 600 feet, is called the epipelagic zone, the sunlight zone, the region where enough light penetrates to support photosynthesis, where plants and plant-like organisms can convert solar energy into chemical energy, where the ocean's primary production occurs. This is the bright ocean, the illuminated layer, the part that feels familiar to anyone who's snorkeled or scuba dived in clear water. Sunlight streams down in visible rays, especially when you look up from underwater toward the surface, seeing the sun's light fractured into beams by waves above, seeing the play of illumination and shadow that makes shallow water so visually dynamic. In the clearest tropical waters, sunlight can penetrate deeper than 200 meters, perhaps to 250 or even 300 meters under ideal conditions. But even this light is dim at such depths, barely enough for the most efficient photosynthesizers, carrying only a tiny fraction of the energy that arrived at the surface. Most photosynthesis happens in the top 100 meters, where light is strong enough for phytoplankton to photosynthesize efficiently. These microscopic organisms, mostly single-celled algae, drift with currents, absorbing sunlight, using its energy to combine carbon dioxide dissolved in seawater with water molecules to create sugars, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. This process happening in trillions upon trillions of phytoplankton cells throughout the top 100 meters of all the world's oceans produces somewhere between 50 and 85% of Earth's oxygen, depending on whose estimates you trust. Every other breath you take comes from the ocean, from phytoplankton you've never seen, from microscopic plants drifting in the sunlit zone, doing what plants have done for billions of years, converting light into life. The sunlit zone is where most marine life concentrates. Fish schools swim here, where light allows vision, where phytoplankton support zooplankton, which support small fish, which support larger fish, which support the entire oceanic food web. Dolphins hunt here, sea turtles feed here, sharks patrol here. The zone is alive with movement, with predation, with growth, with reproduction, with all the activity that characterizes life when energy is abundant and conditions favorable. Below the sunlit zone lies the twilight zone, where light still penetrates but weakly, where photosynthesis can't occur because there's not enough energy. The boundary isn't sharp light, doesn't stop suddenly at exactly 200 meters, but fades gradually, creating a transition zone where blue light lingers longest, where the last photons of sunlight penetrate before being absorbed completely. The sunlit zone is the ocean's engine. This is where energy enters the marine ecosystem, where sunlight gets captured and converted into organic matter, where the food chain begins, where primary production creates the foundation that supports all other oceanic life, from plankton to whales. As you rest here, remember that every breath carries oxygen that might have come from this zone. From microscopic plants drifting in sunny water thousands of miles away, photosynthesizing, splitting water molecules, releasing oxygen that dissolves in water, escapes to atmosphere, circulates globally, and arrives eventually at your lungs. You're connected to the sunlit zone, dependent on it, breathing the byproducts of oceanic photosynthesis, sharing the oxygen that the sea produces as generously as terrestrial forests produce theirs. Below the sunlit zone, from about 200 meters to 1,000 meters deep, lies the mesopelagic zone, the twilight zone, where light fades to near darkness but doesn't quite disappear, where the ocean exists in permanent dusk, where eyes adapted to this dimness can still detect faint traces of sunlight filtering down from the bright surface above. This is the realm of shadows and silhouettes. Predators looking up can see prey silhouetted against the faint glow from above a dark shapes against slightly less dark background. This makes the twilight zone dangerous for anything trying to move through it during daylight hours above. From below, you're visible. From above, you're camouflaged against the darkness below. Many species that live in the twilight zone have evolved a remarkable adaptation bioluminescence on their ventral surfaces, lights on their bellies that match the downwelling light from above. This countershading breaks up their silhouette, makes them nearly invisible from below because their self-generated light matches the background light they're silhouetted against. It's camouflage through creating light rather than through being dark. The twilight zone is also the domain of the daily vertical migration, the largest migration of animals on Earth by biomass. Each night, billions of fish, squid, shrimp, and other creatures rise from the twilight zone into the sunlit zone to feed, taking advantage of darkness to avoid visual predators, feeding on the abundant plankton near the surface. Each morning as the sun rises, they descend back into the twilight zone, spending the day at depth where surface predators can't easily reach them. This migration transfers enormous amounts of biomass up and down through hundreds of meters of water column twice per day. It also transfers carbon organisms eat at the surface at night, descend during day, excrete and respire at depth, moving carbon from surface to deeper water. This biological pump is one mechanism by which the ocean sequesters carbon, moving it from atmospheric contact down into deep water where it can remain for centuries. The light at twilight zone depths is blue, almost exclusively blue, with perhaps a touch of green in some regions. All other colors have been absorbed higher up. The remaining light is diffuse, directionless, creating an environment without shadows, without distinct light sources, just a general dim glow from above that fades gradually to black below. For creatures adapted to this light level, the twilight zone might feel normal, might be their comfortable illumination, the way candlelight or moonlight feels comfortable to humans, even though it's far dimmer than daylight. Their eyes are large, sometimes tubular, adapted to collect maximum light from the scarce photons available, to detect the faintest movements, the subtle bioluminescence of other creatures, the silhouettes of prey against the background glow. The twilight zone is transition. Not quite light, not quite dark, neither surface nor deep, a liminal space between realms, a boundary layer where organisms from above and below overlap, where the last traces of solar energy fade into the cold darkness of the deep ocean. It's the threshold, the vestibule, the space you pass through when descending from light into dark, taking time to adjust, allowing your eyes to adapt, feeling the temperature drop and the pressure increase and the light fade degree by degree until you're no longer in the bright world above but not yet in the absolute darkness below. In the twilight zone and deeper in the dark waters where sunlight never reaches or reaches only as the faintest blue glow, many organisms create their own light. Not by burning, not by heat, but through chemical reactions. Bioluminescence, light produced by living tissue, cold light, light that comes from molecules reacting inside specialized organs. The basic reaction is elegant. A light-producing chemical called luciferin reacts with oxygen in the presence of an enzyme called luciferase. The reaction oxidizes the luciferin, and in the process releases energy as light rather than heat. Different organisms use different versions of luciferin and luciferase, but the principle is the same chemistry producing photons, biological processes creating visible light. This light serves many purposes. Some fish use photophores light-producing organzas lures, dangling a glowing appendage in front of their mouths to attract prey close enough to strike. The anglerfish is famous for this, but many deep-sea fish have similar adaptations, using light to say, "Come here, investigate this interesting glowing thing," to smaller fish that can't resist the curiosity. Other organisms use light for countershading, producing ventral bioluminescence that matches the dim, downwelling light from above, making themselves invisible to predators looking up. Some squids can even adjust the intensity of their bioluminescence to match changing light levels, maintaining perfect camouflage as they rise or descend through the water column. Some use light for communication, flashing patterns that might signal mates, warn rivals, coordinate hunting among groups. Flashlight fish have large light organs under their eyes and can control whether the light is visible by covering it with a dark membrane, creating a flashing effect that might serve as communication. Some use light for defense when disturbed. They release bioluminescent chemicals into the water, creating a glowing cloud that might startle predators or attract larger predators to the attacker, or simply provide distraction while the prey escapes into darkness. Some jellies and squid use this burglar alarm strategy, lighting up their attackers, making them visible to their own predators, and some use light simply to see. Flashlight fish and a few other species can apparently aim their light organs using them as searchlights to illuminate their surroundings, to find prey or navigate through darkness, creating their own portable sunlight in an environment that hasn't seen natural sunlight in millions of years. The variety of bioluminescent organisms is staggering. Jellyfish, comb jellies, squid, octopuses, fish, shrimp, copepods, dinoflagellates, bacteria species from across the animal kingdom have independently evolved the ability to produce light. Some produce the light themselves in specialized cells. Others cultivate bioluminescent bacteria in symbiotic organs, maintaining colonies of light-producing microbes in exchange for nutrients, creating a partnership where bacteria make light and host provides food and transportation. Perhaps the most beautiful bioluminescence is also the simplest dinoflagellates, single-celled organisms that emit a brief blue flash when disturbed. In dense concentrations, they create the phenomenon of bioluminescent bays or glowing waves water that sparkles and glows with movement, that lights up under boat wakes or breaking waves, that turns the dark ocean into a field of blue stars. Each spark a single-celled organism reacting to disturbance, creating light that serves no clear purpose except perhaps to startle predators, but that creates beauty visible to any observer present. Light from life, chemistry becoming photons, organisms generating their own illumination in the permanent night of the deep ocean, creatures that are their own stars, their own candles, their own sources of the light they need to see and be seen and survive and thrive in darkness. Take a red object underwater, a red flag, a red shirt, red coral land at depth it looks black. Not dark red, not maroon, but black, colorless, drained of its redness. This isn't an optical illusion. At depth, there are no red photons to reflect, so red things can't look red. They absorb all available light, which is blue light, and reflect none, appearing black. Divers learn this quickly. Blood looks green underwater. A cut that would produce bright red blood at the surface produces dark greenish fluid underwater, looking almost alien, nothing like the red that human brains are wired to recognize as blood. The blood is still red. Chemically, hemoglobin is still present. Oxygen is still bound to iron. But optically, in the absence of red light to reflect, blood appears the color of whatever light is available, which at depth is blue-green. This color transformation affects everything. Colorful tropical fish that look spectacular in photographs, ranges, yellow appear dull and monochromatic at depth. Only when you illuminate them with artificial light do the colors appear. Underwater photographers use strobes and video lights not for brightness but for color, to provide the full spectrum of wavelengths that water has absorbed, to restore the colors that exist chemically in fish scales and coral tissue but can't be seen without the wavelengths to reflect. The ocean reveals that color isn't an intrinsic property of objects, it's an interaction between object and available light. The fish isn't red in any absolute sense. It's covered in molecules that reflect red wavelengths when red wavelengths are present. In blue light only, the same fish looks dark, perhaps slightly brown or gray, reflecting a tiny bit of the blue light, but mostly absorbing it because its surface chemistry is optimized to reflect red, and red isn't available. This is true everywhere, not just underwater. A red apple appears red in white light because it reflects red wavelengths and absorbs green and blue. In pure blue light, the same apple looks black. In pure red light, it looks bright and colorful. The apple doesn't change, the light does, and the apple's appearance changes accordingly. But we notice this more easily underwater because water so efficiently filters light, removing colors systematically with depth, creating conditions where the light source is obviously lacking in certain wavelengths. On land, in full sunlight, we experience the complete spectrum so consistently that we forget color depends on illumination, that objects don't possess color, but rather reflect or absorb specific wavelengths from whatever light is available. The ocean teaches subtraction. It shows what happens when you remove colors from white light, when you filter out reds and oranges and yellows, leaving only blues and greens. It demonstrates that the colorful world you see is a collaboration between light source and object surfaces, that vision depends on having the right wavelengths available, that darkness can come from lack of specific colors as much as from lack of light entirely. Deep in the ocean, where only blue light penetrates, the world is monochrome blues and blacks and occasionally the green-blue of bioluminescence, not because objects lack color-producing chemistry, but because the light lacks the wavelengths to reveal that chemistry, to interact with those surfaces, to create the perception of color in any observer's eye or brain. Color is contextual. Beauty is conditional. What you see depends on what illuminates it. And in the ocean's depths, where water has filtered sunlight down to near monochrome blue, that truth becomes visible. The ocean's top layer, usually the top 50 to 200 meters depending on location and season, is the mixed layer, the zone where wind and waves stir the water constantly, where temperature is relatively uniform from surface to bottom, where the sun's warmth gets distributed through turbulent mixing. This is the comfortable ocean, the bathwater zone, the part where humans swim without wetsuits in tropical and subtropical regions. The temperature might be 75 degrees Fahrenheit, 80 degrees, sometimes warmer in enclosed bays or shallow lagoons where water sits long enough to absorb substantial heat without mixing with cooler water below. This warmth exists only because of constant stirring. If water sat still, the sun would heat only the top few inches. Water absorbs sunlight quickly, converting it to heat within the first few meters. But waves mix this heated surface water downward. Wind creates currents that circulate water. Storms churn the ocean, mixing warm surface water with cooler water below, distributing heat through a deeper layer. The mixed layer deepens in winter when storms are stronger, when wind blows harder, when mixing extends to greater depths. It shallows in summer, when conditions are calmer, when less energy is available for mixing, when the surface can heat up without that heat being distributed as deeply. In tropical regions with consistent light winds, the mixed layer might be only 30 meters deep. In stormy regions like the North Atlantic, it might extend to 200 meters or more. The bottom of the mixed layer is often marked by a sharp temperature change, the thermocline, which we'll explore soon. But within the mixed layer itself, temperature is fairly consistent. A thermometer lowered through this zone would read nearly the same temperature at 10 meters as at 50 meters, evidence of the constant mixing that defines this region. Life thrives in the mixed layer. This is where phytoplankton photosynthesize, where zooplankton graze, where fish hunt, where most of the ocean's biological activity concentrates. The combination of sunlight, moderate temperature, and nutrient circulation makes this the ocean's most productive region in most places. This is also the layer humans interact with most. Every swimmer, every surfer, every sailor, every person who's ever put a toe in ocean water has experienced the mixed layer. It's the accessible ocean, the part that feels familiar, the zone where temperature doesn't require a wetsuit, where pressure is normal, where light is abundant, where the sea feels welcoming rather than hostile. The mixed layer exists because the ocean can't help but mix. Wind and waves transfer energy to water, and that energy becomes motion, becomes turbulence, becomes stirring that distributes heat downward and brings cooler water upward, creating a zone of relatively uniform conditions. Without this mixing, the ocean would stratify extremely hot surface, cold below, with no transition. But mixing creates a buffer a layer where temperature is moderate and consistent, where conditions are relatively stable, where life can establish itself without constant adjustment to changing temperature. As you rest here, imagine floating in that warm surface layer water that holds you easily because of its salt content, that surrounds you with comfortable temperature, that rocks gently with passing swells, that lets sunlight filter down around you in shifting patterns of brightness. This is the ocean at its most welcoming, its most generous, its warmest embrace. Below the mixed layer, temperature drops suddenly. This boundary of the thermocline can be remarkably sharp, with temperature falling several degrees within just a few vertical meters. A diver descending through it notices immediately comfortable warmth above, sudden cold below, a distinct sensation of passing through an invisible barrier. The thermocline forms because mixing only extends so deep. Below the turbulent surface layer, water sits more quietly, less affected by wind and waves, maintaining whatever temperature it acquired when it was last at the surface or moved from elsewhere by currents. This deeper water is colder either because it cooled at the surface during winter before sinking, or because it flowed from colder regions, or simply because it hasn't been warmed recently. The temperature gradient across the thermocline can be dramatic. Surface water might be 80 degrees Fahrenheit. 20 meters deeper below the thermocline, water might be 60 degrees or even colder. This 20-degree drop happens across a thin boundary layer, creating a temperature wall that divides the ocean into distinct regions. The thermocline acts as a barrier to vertical mixing. Warm water is less dense than cold water. Heat causes water molecules to spread slightly, decreasing density. This density difference makes the thermocline stable. Warm water wants to stay above cold water. It takes considerable energy to mix across the density boundary, more energy than typical winds and waves can provide. So the thermocline persists, sometimes for months, creating a layered ocean where surface conditions don't affect deep water, where the warm zone above and cold zone below exist independently, connected only by slow processes like internal waves or seasonal overturning, when surface water cools enough to become denser than the water below it. Divers sometimes use the thermocline as a reference layer, a distinctive boundary that marks a specific depth. Submarines can hide in or below thermoclines because sonar behaves differently across density. Boundary sound waves bend at the thermocline, creating acoustic shadows where submarines can evade detection. Marine life notices the thermocline too. Some species stay above it, preferring warm water. Others range across it, using both zones. Some stay below it, adapted to consistent cold. The boundary becomes an ecological divider, creating distinct habitats stacked vertically, separated not by solid barriers, but by temperature and density differences. The thermocline's depth and intensity vary with season and location. In tropical oceans, it's present year-round, a permanent feature separating warm surface from cold, deep water. In polar regions, it's weak or absent because surface water is already cold. In temperate regions, it strengthens in summer and weakens or disappears in winter when storms mix the water column deeply and surface cooling reduces the temperature difference. There's something peaceful about boundaries that don't require walls. The thermocline is just water meeting. Water, slightly warmer water, floating above slightly cooler water, the two layers coexisting without mixing, separated by density, held apart by physics, creating structure through temperature alone. No membrane needed, no physical barrier, just the natural tendency of warm to float above cold, creating layers, organizing the ocean vertically, dividing space through properties rather than objects. You exist in layers to consciousness and subconsciousness, waking and sleeping, activity and rest. The boundaries between them aren't sharp walls, but gradual transitions, threshold zones where one state yields to another. You're descending through your own thermocline now, passing from the warm, mixed layer of wakefulness into the cooler, quieter depths of sleep. At the poles, where winter is long and summer is brief, where ice extends across the ocean surface water gets very cold, sometimes just below freezing. Cold enough that only the salt content prevents it from freezing solid. This cold water is dense, denser than warmer water farther south, dense enough to sink. And sink it does. At specific locations, primarily in the North Atlantic near Greenland and in the Southern Ocean around Antarctica cold, dense surface water sinks downward, descending through the water column, beginning a journey that will last centuries, that will carry this water across ocean basins, around continents, through all the world's oceans before eventually returning to the surface. This sinking water forms the ocean's deep layers, the water that fills the abyss, that occupies the depths from 2,000 meters down to the sea floor, that constitutes the largest volume of the ocean's water. Most of the ocean's volume is cold water that sank at the poles and is slowly spreading through the deep ocean basins. The journey is patient beyond human comprehension. A parcel of water that sinks in the North Atlantic might take 500 years to travel to the North Pacific at depth. Another parcel sinking near Antarctica might circulate through the Southern Ocean for 1,000 years before mixing upward into surface layers. These are not precise journeys. The water mixes and spreads and exchanges with surrounding water, but tracers and models suggest that deep water ages for centuries, moving slowly through the dark depths, traveling at speeds measured in centimeters per second, covering perhaps a mile per day, crawling across ocean basins on timescales that make glaciers seem fast. This deep water is cold, typically between 32 and 39 degrees Fahrenheit, just a few degrees above freezing, maintaining the temperature it had when it last saw the surface at polar latitudes. At depth, insulated by thousands of meters of water above, it has no way to warm up. The sun's heat doesn't penetrate this far. Geothermal heat from the seafloor adds only trivial amounts of warmth. The water remains cold, preserving its polar temperature, carrying that coldness across the globe. It's also oxygen-rich when it first sinks, having just been at the surface where it could exchange gases with the atmosphere. This oxygen sustains deep-sea life for centuries as the water ages, though gradually the oxygen is consumed by respiration and decay, making the oldest deep water the most oxygen-poor, marking its age through chemistry. The patient flow of deep water is part of the ocean's global circulation, the conveyor belt that connects all oceans, that eventually brings deep water back to the surface through upwelling zones where winds and currents pull deep water up to replace surface water that has been pushed away from the coast. This upwelling closes the loop, returning ancient deep water to the surface where it can warm, reoxygenate, and eventually sink again at some future polar winter. The circulation is slow but immense. The volume of water involved is staggering, millions of cubic meters per second sinking at polar regions, the same amount upwelling in equatorial and coastal regions, creating a global-scale flow that redistributes heat and nutrients and dissolved gases, that connects surface and depth, that ensures the ocean doesn't stagnate but instead circulates, taking centuries to complete the cycle but completing it nonetheless. Temperature isn't the only property that can create layers in the ocean. Salinity, concentration of dissolved salts, also affects water density, and where salinity changes sharply with depth, a halocline forms, a boundary as distinct as a thermocline, but created by salt rather than temperature. Haloclines form where fresh water and salt water meet. River mouths are classic. Locations fresh river water, less dense than seawater, flows out over the top of denser salt water. The boundary between them can be sharp enough to see, sharp enough to feel if you're swimming. A distinct transition from fresh to salt, from low density to high density, from one world to another. In the Baltic Sea, freshwater input from rivers is so large relative to the sea's volume that a permanent halocline exists. Fresh water on top, saltier water below, the two layers mixing only slowly, creating effectively two distinct water masses occupying the same basin, but remaining separate through density differences. In the Arctic Ocean, sea ice formation and melting create haloclines. When seawater freezes, it excludes. Most saltus is nearly fresh. The rejected salt concentrates in the remaining liquid water, making it denser. Meanwhile, when ice melts, it adds fresh water to the surface, decreasing salinity and density. The result is a layer of relatively fresh water floating on denser, saltier water below, separated by a halocline that can be as strong as any thermocline. Divers can see haloclines in underwater caves and sinkholes where freshwater aquifer meets saltwater intrusion. The boundary appears as a wavering blur, like heat shimmer, caused by light refracting differently through water of different densities. Swimming through it, you pass from one layer to another, feeling the change in buoyancy. You float better in salt water than fresh water, and sometimes seeing distinct differences in temperature and visibility between the layers. Haloclines affect circulation. Where they're strong, they prevent vertical mixing just as thermoclines do. Surface water can't easily mix downward, deep water can't easily mix upward. The layers remain separate, creating stratified oceans where surface and deep water have different properties, different organisms, different conditions. But haloclines are less common than thermoclines. Most ocean water has relatively similar salinity, around 35 parts per thousand, varying by only a few parts per thousand in most locations. Temperature varies much more dramatically, from near freezing to over 80 degrees. Fahrenheit's thermoclines are generally stronger and more widespread than haloclines. Still, where haloclines exist, they create fascinating boundaries. They demonstrate that water can layer itself through multiple properties, that density depends on both temperature and salt content, that the ocean organizes itself vertically through whatever differences exist in its properties. The ocean finds ways to create structure, to establish boundaries, to divide itself into regions, even though it's all the same substance, fundamentally just water, just HUO molecules, but with enough variation in temperature and dissolved substances to create layers, zones, invisible boundaries that organize the ocean as surely as walls organize a house. You're made mostly of water, too, about 60% of your body weight. And that water contains dissolved substances, exists at specific temperature, has properties that matter to your cells. You're a walking halocline, a temperature-controlled salt solution, organized and maintained and kept within narrow parameters because life requires it. Rest now in your carefully balanced internal ocean, your personal seawater, the solution that fills your cells and keeps you alive. The deep ocean from about 2,000 meters down to the seafloor, which can be 4,000, 6,000, even 11,000 meters deep in the trenches, is cold. Not cool, not chilly, but genuinely cold, hovering just a few degrees above freezing, regardless of location, regardless of whether the surface miles above is tropical or polar, regardless of season or weather or surface conditions. This cold is ancient. The water filling the abyss is mostly water that sank at polar regions hundreds or thousands of years ago, water that hasn't seen sunlight since the Renaissance or the Roman Empire or earlier, water that has been circulating slowly through the dark depths, maintaining the temperature it acquired when it last touched the atmosphere at the edge of polar ice. Uniformity of this cold is remarkable. Whether you're in the deep Atlantic, the deep Pacific, the deep Indian Ocean, the temperature is nearly the same between 32 and 37 degrees Fahrenheit, with minimal variation. The deep ocean is isothermal, a vast region of consistent cold, the planet's largest cold storage, holding far more cold water than there is warm water near the surface. This cold preserves. Organic matter sinking into the deep ocean decomposes slowly because the cold slows bacterial metabolism. Shipwrecks in deep water remain preserved for centuries, free from the wood-boring organisms and rapid decay that destroys ships in warm, shallow water. The Titanic sits in cold, deep water, deteriorating but slowly, protected by the cold and pressure and darkness from the rapid degradation it would experience in warmer, shallower water. The cold also concentrates animals' energy budgets. In cold water, metabolism slows. Deep-sea fish move rarely, hunt infrequently, live patient lives of minimal activity. They don't need much food because they don't use much energy. The cold allows them to exist on minimal intake, to wait weeks or months between meals, to survive in an environment where food is scarce because their energy requirements are proportionally scarce. There's a strange peacefulness to this uniform cold. The deep ocean doesn't experience seasons, doesn't warm in summer or cool in winter, doesn't fluctuate with weather or currents or any surface process. It simply is cold, dark, stable, unchanging on human timescales, maintaining conditions that have persisted for millions of years, that will persist for millions more, that represent the ocean's baseline state, its default temperature, the coldness that would fill all the ocean if the sun stopped heating the surface. The surface warmth is temporaria, thin layer heated by sun, stirred by wind, made comfortable for humans and the creatures that live in the bright zone. But most of the ocean is this cold, deep water, this ancient cold, this stable, refrigerated mass that constitutes the true ocean, the permanent ocean, the water that defines what ocean means to the planet rather than what it means to surface visitors. You're descending toward this cold now, not physically but metaphorically, sinking from the warm, mixed layer of waking consciousness through the thermocline of drowsiness into the deep, cold, stable region of sleep where metabolism slows, where activity nearly ceases, where you rest in darkness and cold and pressure, held by conditions as stable as the deep ocean, as unchanging as ancient water, as peaceful as the abyss. Imagine a river 60 miles wide and 3,000 feet deep, flowing through the ocean at speeds up to 5 miles per hour, carrying warm water from the tropics northward across thousands of miles. This river doesn't need bank sits. Boundaries are density differences, temperature contrasts, the ocean organizing itself into fast-moving current and relatively still surrounding water. The Gulf Stream is this river. It begins in the Gulf of Mexico, where sun-warmed water accumulates, squeezed by the Gulf's geography, builds up pressure, and eventually finds its way out between Florida and Cuba, entering the Atlantic as a concentrated flow of warm water. The current flows northward, along the east coast of North America past Miami, past Cape Hatteras, past New England, carrying tropical warmth into temperate and eventually polar latitudes. The warm water in the Gulf Stream is noticeably different from surrounding water. Ships crossing it record sudden temperature increases. The water is bluer, clearer, less productive biologically, because warm water from the tropics is nutrient. Both the nutrients have already been consumed by tropical organisms. As the Gulf Stream flows northward, it carries more water than all the rivers on Earth combined. The volume is staggering about 100 million cubic meters per second near Florida, increasing to 150 million cubic meters per second as the current pulls in additional water. This is roughly 100 times the flow of the Amazon River, the world's largest river by volume. The Gulf Stream eventually crosses the Atlantic, bringing warm water to Europe. This warmth moderates European climate dramatically. London, at 51 degrees north latitude, has roughly the same latitude as Calgary, Canada. But London's climate is far milder, rarely experiencing Calgary's bitter winters, because the Gulf Stream carries tropical warmth across the Atlantic, releasing that warmth to the atmosphere as the water cools, warming the air, creating the mild maritime climate that characterizes Western Europe. Without the Gulf Stream, Europe would be much colder. England might have the climate of Labrador, France might resemble Quebec. The difference is warmth carried by water, heat distributed by current, tropical energy shared with temperate regions through the ocean's circulation. The Gulf Stream is part of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, a system of currents that includes not just the surface Gulf Stream, but also the deep southward flow of cold water that sank at high northern latitudes. Surface water flows north, cools, sinks, returns south, a depth loop, a conveyor belt, a circulation pattern that redistributes heat from equator to pole. This redistribution matters climatically. It moderates temperature extremes, makes more of the planet habitable, prevents tropical regions from getting even hotter and polar regions from getting even colder. The ocean shares energy, distributes what it receives unevenly from the sun, creates a more balanced planet through its patient movement of vast quantities of water. The Gulf Stream flows tonight, whether anyone notices or not, whether ships cross it or not, carrying warmth northward as it has for thousands of years, as it will for thousands more, following patterns established by Earth's rotation and wind and the shape of ocean basins, doing what currents do, moving water, redistributing heat, connecting distant places through liquid flow. Each major ocean basin contains a gyre, a massive circular current system that can be thousands of miles across, that rotates slowly over months or years, that organizes the ocean's surface circulation into predictable patterns. In the North Atlantic, the gyre rotates clockwise. The Gulf Stream forms its western boundary current, the fast-moving edge. The North Atlantic drift continues the circulation eastward across the Atlantic. The Canary Current flows southward along Africa's northwest coast. The North Equatorial Current flows westward back toward the Caribbean, completing the circle. The North Pacific has a similar gyre, also rotating clockwise, the Kuroshio. Current Japan's equivalent of the Gulf Stream on the west, the North Pacific Drift across the top, the California Current down the east, the North Equatorial Current across the bottom. The South Atlantic and South Pacific have gyres too, rotating counterclockwise opposite the northern gyres, because the Coriolis effect acts oppositely in the southern hemisphere. And the Indian Ocean has a more complex pattern because of its northern boundary against Asia and the seasonal monsoons that reverse some currents. These gyres rotate because of wind patterns and Earth's rotation. The trade winds blow westward in the tropics, the westerlies blow eastward at mid-latitudes, and these winds push the ocean surface, creating currents. But the currents don't flow straight, the Coriolis effect deflects them, creating the circular patterns we see as gyres. The center of each gyre is relatively calmer region, where currents are weak, where water accumulates, where floating objects collect. The Sargasso Sea occupies the center of the North Atlantic gyre, a region of clear, deep blue water covered with floating sargassum seaweed, calm and warm, surrounded by the stronger currents of the gyre's edges. Unfortunately, modern gyres also collect floating plastic. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch occupies the North Pacific gyre's center, not a solid island of trash as sometimes portrayed, but a region of elevated plastic concentration, where small plastic fragments float dispersed through the water column, trapped by the circular current pattern that prevents them from escaping to shore or to other ocean regions. The gyres organize ocean circulation at the largest scales. They're planetary features, patterns that emerge from global wind systems and ocean basin shapes, circulation that would exist on any rotating planet with oceans and atmosphere. They're not random. They're the ocean's response to the forces acting on it, the pattern that results from wind and rotation and geography combining. There's a strange beauty in these massive spirals, water rotating slowly across thousands of miles, completing one circuit every few years, creating structure from flow, organization from fluid. The ocean doesn't just slosh randomly. It organizes itself into coherent patterns, into circulation systems that persist, into gyres that rotate predictably year after year, driven by forces that don't change, following patterns that are stable across decades and centuries. As you rest, your own circulation continues, blood flowing through vessels, creating loops and spirals through your body, delivering oxygen, removing waste, flowing without your conscious direction, organized by anatomy and pressure gradients into predictable patterns, a gyre of your own at human scale, rotating through your personal ocean of blood and plasma, completing its circuit every minute, every hour, every day, for as long as you live. In certain locations, deep water rises to the surface, bringing with it nutrients from the depths, fertilizing the sunlit zone, creating regions of exceptional productivity where phytoplankton bloom, zooplankton swarm, fish schools gather, seabirds wheel overhead, and marine mammals hunt in abundance. These upwelling zones are the ocean's gardens, its most productive regions, its richest fishing grounds. They occur where winds or currents push surface water away from the coast and deep water rises to replace it. Along the west coast of South America, the Peru current flows northward, and prevailing winds blow the surface water westward, away from the coast. The surface water can't just disappear. Something must replace it. Deep water rises, cold and nutrient-rich, completing the cycle. This upwelling supports one of the world's most productive fisheries, anchovy and sardine, in enormous quantities, feeding millions of seabirds, supporting industrial fishing that provides protein to millions of people. Similar upwelling occurs off the coast of California, off northwest Africa, off southwest Africa. In each case, the pattern is the same. Winds push surface water away, deep water rises, nutrients reach the sunlit zone, productivity explodes. The nutrients matter because the ocean surface is generally nutrient poor. Phytoplankton consume nutrients quickly: nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and when they die, they sink, carrying those nutrients downward. Over time, the surface becomes depleted, while the depths accumulate nutrients from centuries of sinking organic matter. Surface water can be clear and blue precisely because it's nutrient poor, because there's not enough nutrients to support dense phytoplankton populations. But deep water, enriched by centuries of accumulation, is nutrient-rich. When it upwells, it brings those nutrients back to the sunlit zone where phytoplankton can use them. The result is blooms, rapid population explosions of phytoplankton, turning water green or brown from the density of microscopic plants, creating visible patches miles across that can be seen from satellites. These blooms support food chains. Zooplankton graze the phytoplankton. Small fish eat the zooplankton. Larger fish eat the small fish. The entire ecosystem responds to the nutrient input, to the deep water's generosity, to the ocean's way of recycling, of bringing old nutrients back to light where they can support new life. Upwelling zones are often cold. The deep water is cold and it doesn't have time to warm significantly before being used by phytoplankton. Swimming in upwelling zones can be shockingly cold even in summer, even in tropical latitudes, because you're swimming in water that was at depth recently, that carries the deep ocean's cold to the surface. But this cold comes with life. The cold water brings nutrients. The nutrients support plankton. The plankton support fish. The fish support everything else. Upwelling zones are proof that cold water is valuable, that what the deep ocean holds isn't just cold, but fertility, potential productivity, nutrients waiting to be recycled back into use. The ocean breathes in other ways. Besides tides, it also breathes vertically, bringing deep water up, sending surface water down, exchanging between layers, mixing slowly but continuously, ensuring that nutrients don't stay trapped forever at depth, that productivity doesn't cease when surface nutrients are exhausted, that the ocean as a whole remains fertile through this patient vertical circulation. The ocean has a pulse, a global circulation pattern that connects all ocean basins, that links surface and depth, that takes about 1,000 years to complete one full circuit. Scientists call it the thermohaline, circulation driven by temperature, thermo, and salinity, haline, by density differences that make water sink or rise. The circulation begins where we've already visited, polar regions where cold water sinks. In the North Atlantic, near Greenland and Iceland, surface water cools in winter, becomes dense enough to sink, and begins flowing southward at depth. This deep water flows along the Atlantic seafloor, crosses the equator, continues into the Southern Ocean around Antarctica. There it joins water sinking around Antarctica, water made dense not just by cold, but by salt rejection during sea ice formation. This combined water, mass called Antarctic bottom water and North Atlantic deep water, spreads through all the ocean basins, flowing along the deep sea floor, gradually warming and mixing upward through diffusion and turbulent mixing. The deep water eventually reaches the North Pacific and North Indian Oceans, where it slowly upwells, returning to the surface after centuries at depth. This surface water warms, flows back toward the Atlantic through the Indonesian passages and around southern Africa, and eventually returns to the North Atlantic, where some of it will sink again, completing the cycle. The entire loop takes roughly 1,000 years. Water that sinks today in the North Atlantic won't return to that region's surface for a millennium. It will travel through every ocean, visit the deepest basins, circulate through the Southern Ocean, gradually mix upward, eventually return to the surface far from where it sank, warm, and flow back to complete the circuit. This circulation redistributes heat globally. Surface currents carry warm water poleward. Deep currents carry cold water equatorward. The net effect is heat transfer from tropics to poles, moderating the temperature difference, making the planet more habitable at all latitudes. The circulation also redistributes nutrients and dissolved gases. Oxygen absorbed at the surface when water last touched the atmosphere gets carried to the depths. Carbon dioxide absorbed from the atmosphere gets transported downward, sequestered for centuries while the water circulates through the deep ocean. Nutrients from decomposition in deep water eventually return to the surface through upwelling, supporting new primary production. If this circulation stopped, the ocean would change dramatically. The deep ocean would become oxygen depleted. Surface waters would become nutrient starved. Climate would shift as heat redistribution ceased. Regional temperatures would become more extreme, hotter tropics, colder poles, more dramatic seasons. Some climate models suggest that warming could weaken or even stop the circulation. Melting ice could add enough fresh water to North Atlantic surface water that it becomes too light to sink, breaking the cycle. This remains uncertain, but the possibility concerns scientists because the circulation plays such a crucial role in global climate. For now, the conveyor belt runs, carrying water on thousand-year journeys, connecting all oceans into one system, demonstrating that the ocean is truly a singular-only body of water. One interconnected circulation, one system that functions as a whole despite its vastness, organizing itself through density differences into a global pattern of flow that has persisted throughout human history and will persist, we hope, for centuries to come. Not all ocean circulation is organized into predictable patterns. Some currents break apart, spinning off eddies, rotating masses of water that detach from main current systems and drift across ocean basins like wheels rolling slowly across a floor, maintaining their spin for months or even years. Ocean eddies form when fast currents become unstable, when meanders in the flow grow large enough to pinch off, creating isolated rotating systems. The Gulf Stream constantly sheds eddies, both warm core eddies that spin clockwise and contain Gulf Stream water, and cold core eddies that spin counterclockwise and contain water from the cold Labrador Current. These eddies drift westward across the Atlantic, gradually weakening but persisting for months, maintaining internal structure even as they travel. An eddy is Strangeite's water rotating, but it's also an object, a discrete entity that moves as a unit. The water inside an eddy maintains different temperature and salinity from surrounding water. The eddy's rotation creates a boundary that limits mixing with outside water, keeping the eddy's internal properties distinct. An eddy is like a spinning top made of water, maintaining its identity through rotation, moving across the ocean as an independent system. Eddies range from tens to hundreds of kilometers in diameter. The largest can be 500 kilometers across, the size of a large state containing billions of cubic meters of rotating water. They rotate slowly by human standards. Edge might move at half a mile per hour, but fast enough to create distinct circulation within the eddy, fast enough to trap and transport organisms, fast enough to be detected by satellites observing sea surface height. Because eddies maintain distinct internal properties, they transport water characteristics across distances. A warm core eddy shed by the Gulf Stream carries tropical warmth into cooler regions. A cold core eddy carries subpolar water into warmer areas. The eddies mix properties gradually with surrounding water, but while they persist, they create local anomalies, warm spots in cold regions, cold spots in warm regions, patches of water with different salinity or nutrient content than the surrounding ocean. Marine life responds to eddies. Phytoplankton distributions differ inside and outside eddies. Fish aggregate at eddy boundaries where different water masses meet, where productivity is enhanced by mixing. Seabirds and marine mammals hunt at these boundaries, taking advantage of the concentration of prey. From space, eddies are visible as subtle bulges or depressions in sea surface, height millimeters of difference, but measurable by precise satellite altimeters. Mapping these features reveals an ocean filled with eddies, with hundreds rotating simultaneously, drifting across basins, gradually weakening but persisting for months, creating a constantly shifting pattern of rotating systems within the larger circulation. Eddies teach that the ocean isn't just organized into stable currents and gyres. It's also full of transient features, temporary structures, spinning systems that form and dissipate continuously, adding variability to the ocean's behavior, creating local conditions that differ from regional averages, making the ocean more complex and interesting than simple maps of average currents suggest. The ocean is fractal in this way, patterns within patterns, circulation at many scales, from the global conveyor belt to major gyres to boundary currents to eddies to smaller swirls, all coexisting, all contributing to the total movement of water, all part of the ocean's restless motion that never truly stops. The word plankton comes from the Greek planktos, meaning wanderer, drifter, something that roams without fixed course. It's a perfect name for organisms that can't swim against currents, that go where water takes them, that have surrendered to flow, that trust the ocean's movement to carry them where they need to be. Plankton includes everything that drifts: bacteria, single-celled plants, tiny animals, jellyfish, larval fish, even drifting seaweed. The unifying characteristic isn't size or type, but lifestyle. They drift. They might swim a little, might move up and down vertically, but horizontally, they go where currents carry them. They've given up control over location, accepted that the ocean will move them, adapted to life as passengers in flowing water. And there are so many of them. Plankton vastly outnumber all other organisms on Earth. A single liter of seawater might contain millions of plankton cells, bacteria, phytoplankton, tiny zooplankton, each one a complete organism, living its life, reproducing, contributing to ocean processes, eventually dying and sinking or being eaten. The abundance is difficult to comprehend. There are more plankton in the ocean than stars in the galaxy, more individual organisms than you could count if you spent your entire life counting, a biomass that exceeds all terrestrial life combined. The ocean is thick with life at microscopic scales, teeming with organisms too small to see individually, but present in such quantities that they color the water, affect light penetration, contribute to the ocean's chemistry. Most plankton are photosynthetic bacteria and single-celled algae phytoplankton, the ocean's plants. They drift near the surface where light is available, absorbing sunlight, performing photosynthesis, producing oxygen, creating organic matter from carbon dioxide and water. They're the base of the marine food chain, the foundation that supports everything else, the primary producers that capture solar energy and make it available to organisms that can't photosynthesize. Without plankton, the ocean would be a desert. No base of the food chain means no zooplankton, no small fish, no large fish, no whales, no seabirds, nothing. The entire marine ecosystem rests on these drifters, these wanderers, these microscopic organisms that surrender to currents but dominate the ocean through sheer numbers. There's something zen about plankton existence. They don't fight currents. They don't strain against the flow. They simply are drifting, photosynthesizing, reproducing, dying, going where water goes, trusting that currents will carry them to suitable conditions, or if not, that their enormous reproductive output ensures that some offspring will find themselves in favorable locations. This is ultimate surrender, not passive, because plankton are actively alive, actively metabolizing, actively responding to their environment, but accepting, trusting, flowing with forces larger than themselves, living successfully through adaptation to drift rather than resistance to it. You can learn from plankton. Not everything requires control. Not every destination must be chosen. Sometimes the wisest course is to drift, to allow larger forces to carry you, to trust that where you end up will be where you need to be, that the flow knows things you don't, that surrender is not defeat but strategy, not weakness but wisdom, earned through billions of years of evolution perfecting the art of thriving through drift. Stand in a forest and you see tree trunks rising toward sky, branches spreading, leaves catching sunlight, chlorophyll converting light to sugar. The forest is obviously alive, obviously productive, obviously important to the ecosystem. Stand by the ocean and you see water. Maybe some waves, perhaps a ship in the distance, possibly birds overhead. The water looks empty, looks inactive, looks like a space between places rather than a place itself. But beneath that deceptively simple surface, an invisible forest exists. Phytoplankton, microscopic planks drifting in the sunlit zone, performing the same function as terrestrial forests, but invisibly, without the visual drama of trees, without anything most people ever notice. These phytoplankton, mostly single-celled algae called diatoms, dinoflagellates, and coccolithophores plants in the functional sense. They contain chlorophyll. They capture sunlight. They perform photosynthesis. They produce oxygen. They create organic matter from inorganic ingredients. They do everything forests do, but as single cells, individually invisible, collectively covering the ocean surface with a thin layer of microscopic productivity. And they produce more than half of Earth's oxygen. The exact percentages debated estimates range from 50 to 85%, but even the low estimate means that every other breath you take comes from phytoplankton. The air you're breathing right now contains oxygen that was released by a phytoplankton cell photosynthesizing somewhere in the ocean within the past few decades. This makes phytoplankton critically important to planetary function. Without them, the atmosphere would gradually lose oxygen as it's consumed by respiration and oxidation. Within thousands of years, oxygen levels would drop significantly. Most animal life would struggle or die. The planet would become very different, very hostile to organisms like us that depend on oxygen-rich atmosphere. Yet phytoplankton are fragile. Each cell lives only days or weeks. They reproduce rapidly, doubling daily in favorable conditions, but they also die rapidly, eaten by zooplankton or sinking when they die. The standing crop of phytoplankton at any moment is only a tiny fraction of the ocean's biomass. But the turnover is so rapid that over a year, phytoplankton produce more organic matter than all terrestrial plants combined. They're also vulnerable to changing ocean conditions. They need nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, which can become depleted. They need light, which is absorbed quickly in water. They're affected by temperature, by pH, by salinity. Climate change affects them in complex ways. Warming helps some species, but harms others. Changing circulation affects nutrient delivery. Increasing carbon dioxide changes water chemistry. We depend on organisms we never see, on microscopic plants drifting in water, on life so small you need a microscope to observe individual cells. These invisible plants produce the oxygen you breathe, support the fish you might eat, regulate atmospheric chemistry, affect global climate. They're among the most important organisms on Earth, yet most people never think about them, never learn their names, never consider their existence. As you breathe in, thank the phytoplankton. Thank the invisible forest that drifts in sunlit water, that photosynthesizes in currents, that produces oxygen as a byproduct of making sugar from sunlight and carbon dioxide and water. They don't know you exist. They don't care. But they keep you alive anyway through the simple act of doing what they evolved to do: capture light, make food, release oxygen, drift. Where there are plants, there are animals that eat plants. Phytoplankton support vast numbers of zooplankton, microscopic and small animals that graze on the invisible forest, consuming phytoplankton cells, converting plant matter to animal tissue, forming the crucial link between primary producers and larger predators. Some zooplankton are single-celled animals, protozoans that engulf phytoplankton cells, digest them, grow, reproduce. Others are multicellular but still tiny copepods, the most abundant animals in the ocean, creatures resembling microscopic shrimp, typically a millimeter or two long, swimming with jerky movements, filtering phytoplankton from water, producing the dense populations that feed small fish. Copepods are extraordinarily abundant. Some estimates suggest there are more copepods than any other multicellular animal on Earth, more copepods than insects, more than nematodes, more than any vertebrate species. They're so numerous that their combined biomass might exceed 1 billion tons, more than all humans, all cattle, all whales, all fish combined. Yet most people have never heard of them, never seen one, never knew they existed. They're beautiful, under microscopes, translucent bodies, segmented like shrimp, long antennae for sensing water movement, swimming legs that create tiny currents, feeding appendages that filter phytoplankton, sometimes colored by the food they've eaten, sometimes carrying egg sacs with developing young. They're complex animals with nervous systems, digestive systems, reproductive systems, sensory systems, complete organisms packed into millimeter-scale bodies. Other zooplankton are larger. Krill shrimp-like creatures an inch or two long form the base of polar food chains, supporting whales, penguins, seals, seabirds. Jellyfish of various sizes drift with currents, capturing prey with stinging tentacles. Arrowworms, centimeter-long predatory plankton hunt copepods. Salps, transparent barrel-shaped animals, filter phytoplankton while drifting in chains that can stretch for meters. Many zooplankton are larval fish and invertebrates, young crabs, young shrimp, young barnacles, young fish spending their early life drifting before settling to adult habitats or transitioning to active swimming. This means many familiar marine animals have a planktonic phase, a period of life when they drift, when they're part of the invisible world of microscopic organisms carried by currents. Zooplankton create the ocean's primary connection between photosynthesis and higher predators. Phytoplankton are too small for most fish to eat efficiently. But zooplankton eat phytoplankton, accumulate that biomass, package it into larger bodies that small fish can pursue. Small fish eat zooplankton, larger fish eat small fish, and energy moves up the food chain from sunlight to phytoplankton to zooplankton to fish to sharks or tuna or seabirds or seals or whales. Without zooplankton, this energy transfer would fail. Phytoplankton would bloom, die, sink, and the energy would go to bacteria and deep-sea organisms rather than supporting the surface ecosystem. Zooplankton create the connection, bridge the size gap, make it possible for large animals to benefit from microscopic plants' productivity. The grazers are as important as the plants. They're the intermediary, the translator, the link between small and large, between plants and predators, between photosynthesis and everything that doesn't photosynthesize. They're silent, invisible, uncelebrated workers maintaining the ocean's food chain, doing quietly and constantly the work that keeps marine ecosystems functioning. Every night, one of the largest migrations on Earth takes place. Not birds flying south, not wildebeest crossing the Serengeti, but zooplankton, billions of tons of small animals rising from depth toward the surface, ascending hundreds of meters to feed in shallow waters under cover of darkness. This is called vertical migration, meaning daily, vertical meaning up and down, migration meaning regular movement between habitats. It happens in oceans worldwide, in lakes too, wherever there's deep water below productive surface water, wherever zooplankton face a trade-off between feeding and safety. The pattern is consistent. At dusk, zooplankton that spend the day at depth begin ascending. They rise. Slowly, typical speeds are about 100 meters per hour, patient climbing that takes several hours to complete. By the time darkness is full, they've reached the surface layers where phytoplankton are abundant, where food is rich, where feeding is efficient. They feed through the night, grazing on phytoplankton, accumulating energy, growing. But as dawn approaches, they begin descending, sinking back into deep water, spending the daylight hours at 200, 400, sometimes 600 meters deep, in the twilight zone or below, where light is dim or absent, where visual predators can't easily spot them. The migration is protective. During the day, surface waters are dangerous, full of fish that hunt by sight, that can easily see small zooplankton silhouetted against bright background that would quickly consume them. But at depth, in dimness or darkness, zooplankton are safer. The trade-off is missing feeding opportunities. There's little food at depth, few phytoplankton in the dark waters. So zooplankton spend daylight hours hungry but safe, night hours feeding but exposed to darkness-adapted predators. The migration is so massive that it's visible on sonar. Depth sounders show a deep scattering layer region that reflects sound, that appears as a false bottom. This layer is zooplankton, billions of tiny animals, each one reflecting sound waves, collectively creating a layer dense enough to appear on instruments. During the day, the deep scattering layer is at depth. At night, it rises to surface layers. The pattern is so regular that early oceanographers were puzzled before they realized they were seeing animals migrating, not seafloor changes. The migration moves nutrients and carbon vertically through the water column. Zooplankton feed at the surface, consuming phytoplankton, converting plant carbon to animal carbon. They descend during day, respire and excrete at depth, releasing carbon in deep water where it can remain for years before mixing back to the surface. This biological pump is one mechanism that moves carbon from atmosphere to deep ocean, contributing to carbon sequestration, affecting global carbon cycles. There's a beautiful rhythm to this migration. The ocean pulsing daily, biomass rising and falling, life moving between zones, following patterns established by the sun's daily cycle, by the need to feed versus the need to hide, by adaptations refined over millions of years. The ocean breathes vertically, pulling animals upward at night, releasing them to depth during day, creating flow between layers, connecting surface and depth through living tissue, through animals that refuse to stay in one place but instead commute daily between worlds. In the ocean's depths, far below the sunlit zone where photosynthesis occurs, far from the productivity and abundance of surface waters, organisms face a problem. How to eat when there's no light for plants, no photosynthesis to create food, no local energy source to support life. The answer falls from above. Marine snow, constant gentle rain of organic particles drifting downward from productive surface waters feeds the deep ocean, carries energy from the sunlit zone to the abyss, connects the bright waters above with the dark waters below. Marine snow consists of dead plankton, fecal pellets from zooplankton, molted exoskeletons, mucus from jellyfish, bits of decaying seaweed, bacterial aggregations, all clumping together into larger particles, falling slowly through the water column, taking days or weeks to descend from surface to seafloor thousands of meters below. The particles fall slowly because they're small, because water resists their descent, because turbulence and currents carry them sideways as much as downward. A typical marine snow particle might fall at 100 to 200 meters per day, meaning it takes 10 days to reach the bottom in water 2,000 meters deep, 2 months in the deepest ocean trenches. As particles fall, they're eaten and reprocessed. Zooplankton in the twilight zone intercept some, consuming the organic matter, breaking large particles into smaller ones, producing their own fecal pellets that continue falling. Bacteria colonize the particles, decomposing them, releasing nutrients, shrinking the organic matter. By the time marine snow reaches the deep sea floor, only about 1% of the organic matter that left the surface remains. The rest has been consumed or dissolved during the long descent. But that 1% matters enormously to deep sea organisms. It's their food source, their energy input, the foundation of deep sea food webs. Sea cucumbers crawl across the seafloor ingesting sediment, extracting organic matter. Brittle stars extend arms into the water to catch falling particles. Fish hover in the water column, mouths open, filtering marine snow. The entire deep-sea ecosystem is supported by this gentle rain from above, by productivity that happened miles above and weeks ago finally arriving at depth. Marine snow also transports carbon to the deep ocean. Phytoplankton at the surface fix carbon from atmospheric carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. When they die, this carbon sinks as marine snow. Some gets respired and released as carbon dioxide during the descent, but some reaches the deep ocean and seafloor where it can be buried in sediments, effectively removing it from the carbon cycle for millions of years. This biological pump is a major pathway by which the ocean sequesters carbon, moderating atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, affecting global climate. The name marine snow is poetic and accurate. It looks like snow if you're underwater, watching particles drift down through the water, illuminated by dive lights, slowly descending, never quite stopping. A constant soft precipitation that feeds the depths and connects the ocean vertically, ensuring that even the darkest, coldest, most remote regions receive at least some benefit from the surface's productivity, some share of the energy that entered the ecosystem through photosynthesis in bright waters far above. Watch a fish in an aquarium. It swims constantly, seemingly without effort, without breathing hard, without needing to rest. It turns, accelerates, hovers, all with motions that look effortless, that suggest swimming costs fish almost nothing energetically. And that's nearly true. Fish are extraordinarily efficient swimmers, far more efficient than humans or most other animals moving through water. The difference is body design, sensory systems, and millions of years of adaptation to aquatic life. A fish's body is streamlined shaped to minimize drag, to slip through water with minimal resistance. The body tapers at both ends, bulges slightly in the middle, creating a form that water flows around easily. Scales provide a smooth surface with slight texture that actually reduces turbulence. Mucus coating the scales makes the surface even slicker, reducing friction further. Fish swim by bending their bodies side to side, creating waves that travel from head to tail, pushing water backward, propelling the fish forward. The tail provides final thrust, sculling side to side, generating most of the propulsion. The motion is fluid, continuous, efficient, far more so than the flailing limbs mammals use when trying to swim. Most fish have a swim bladder, a gas-filled organ that provides buoyancy, allowing fish to hover at any depth without swimming, to maintain position without expending energy. The bladder's volume can be adjusted, gazetted, or removed to match changing depth, maintaining neutral buoyancy. This means fish don't sink when they stop swimming, don't have to constantly work to stay off the bottom the way negatively buoyant organisms do. Fish also have a lateral linear sensory system that detects water movement, pressure changes, vibrations. This lets fish sense nearby objects, even in darkness or murky water, even from behind where they can't see. They feel the water's flow around them, sense turbulence created by other fish or obstacles, navigate through complex environments using pressure as input, not just vision. All this adds up to fish that swim with minimal energy expenditure, that can maintain cruising speed for hours, that rarely show signs of fatigue. They're operating in the medium they evolved for, using body design optimized for hydrodynamics, sensing their environment through pressure as much as light, existing in a space where they're neutrally buoyant and movement is nearly effortless. Compare this to human swimming. We're not streamlined. We're not designed for water. We struggle, thrash, tire quickly, fight to stay afloat because we're denser than water. We don't have swim bladders, don't have lateral lines, can't sense pressure waves. We're visitors in water, awkward guests in a medium that isn't ours. But fish are home. Water is their medium. They move through it with the ease that birds show in air, with the comfort that you feel walking on land. It's not that they don't get tired metabolically, swimming costs energy, but the efficiency is so high, the design so refined, that swimming is no more exhausting for a fish than standing is for you. They're built for this, adapted to this, perfect for this environment in ways that evolution perfects organisms over hundreds of millions of years. Sea turtles swim with slow, powerful strokes of their flippers, pulling themselves through water with motions that look almost like flying, like underwater flight with wings instead of fins. The pace is unhurried, deliberate, creating the impression of an animal in no rush, going somewhere but taking its time, patient, in ways that modern humans struggle to comprehend. This patience extends to their entire life cycle. Sea turtles live long, some species reaching 80 or even 100 years. They mature, slowly taking 10, 20, sometimes 30 years to reach reproductive age. They migrate vast distances, thousands of miles between feeding grounds and nesting beaches, crossing entire ocean basins, navigating by mechanisms we're still trying to understand. Female sea turtles return to nest on the same beaches where they hatched decades earlier. Turtle that emerged from a nest in Florida as a hatchling that swam into the Atlantic as a 2-inch creature that spent 25 years feeding and growing and traveling returns to the same beach, sometimes to the same stretch of sand, guided by magnetic signatures, by chemical cues, by memories or instincts that operate at timescales longer than most human memories. They nest multiple times per season, coming ashore every 2 weeks, laboriously dragging their heavy bodies up the beach, digging nests with their rear flippers, depositing about 100 eggs, covering them carefully, returning to the sea. The effort is enormous. The success rate low. Predators take many eggs and hatchlings. Only about 1 in 1,000 hatchlings survives to adulthood. But the turtles persist. They've been doing this for over 100 million years older than most mammal lineages. Survivors of the extinction that killed dinosaurs, witnesses to massive climate changes and sea level fluctuations and continental drift. They continue their ancient patterns, nesting and migrating and feeding, adapted to a lifestyle that values patience over speed, persistence over intensity, long, slow lives over brief, dramatic ones. Watching a sea turtle underwater is meditation. The slow flipper strokes, the graceful gliding between strokes, the slight adjustments to direction, the gentle descent or ascent, all performed without haste, without apparent effort, with the calm of an animal that has no deadline, no urgency, just the steady progress toward wherever it's going, a feeding ground, a resting area, a distant beach that it will reach eventually in its own time, on its own schedule. Modern life rarely offers this kind of patience. We rush, hurry, optimize time, squeeze productivity from every hour. We're impatient with traffic, with slow internet, with anything that makes us wait. We've lost the art of slow progress, of accepting that some journeys take decades, that some goals require patience measured in years or lifetimes. Sea turtles teach otherwise. They teach that slow can be enough, that patience enables survival, that taking decades to mature and migrate and return doesn't prevent success, it enables it, creates resilience, allows for lives measured in generations, for species that persist through eras while faster living organisms come and go. As you rest, adopt turtle pace. Let your breathing slow to turtle speed. Those slow, powerful strokes repeated steadily, patiently, without rush. Let your thoughts become turtle thought. Sun-hurried, accepting that rest takes time, that sleep arrives on its own schedule, that you can't force it but only swim patiently toward it, trusting that you'll arrive, eventually, in your own time. A jellyfish is mostly water, up to 98% water by weight. The rest is a thin layer of tissue, a simple nerve net, some muscle fibers, and the stinging cells in his tentacles. It's barely there, barely a physical presence, more absence than substance, more water than body, yet somehow alive, somehow functioning, somehow thriving. Jellyfish swim by pulsing, contracting their bell-shaped body, squeezing water out from under the bell, creating jet propulsion that pushes them forward or upward. Then they relax, the bell expands, and they drift passively downward. Pulse, drift, pulse, drift. That's jellyfish locomotion, minimal effort, maximum efficiency, movement that costs so little energy that jellyfish can afford to live in nutrient-poor water where more active animals would starve. The pulsing is hypnotic, regular rhythm, gentle motion, no sudden movements, no drama. Watching jellyfish in an aquarium can induce a trance-like state, the repetitive pulsing creating visual rhythm that your brain entrains to, that slows your thoughts, that becomes meditation without trying to meditate. Jellyfish don't have brains. They have a nerve, net distributed neurons throughout their tissue, no central processing, no brain structure. They're neurologically simple, responding to stimuli with programmed responses, swimming upward toward light or downward toward darkness, pulsing to maintain position, extending tentacles to catch prey, but doing all this without thinking, without consciousness, without anything like the mental experience that humans have. Yet they persist. Jellyfish have existed for over 500 million years, longer than fish, vastly longer than mammals, among the oldest animals on Earth. Their simplicity is advantage, the minimal structure reducing vulnerability, the low metabolism allowing survival in poor conditions. They don't need much because they're not much, mostly water, minimal tissue, basic function, but function that works, that has worked for hundreds of millions of years. Some jellyfish are biologically immortal. The so-called immortal jellyfish can revert to its juvenile polyp stage after reaching maturity, essentially resetting its life cycle, potentially living forever if not killed by predators or disease. This ability seems miraculous, seems like cheating death, but it's just biology's cellular reprogramming, dedifferentiation, transformation that works because jellyfish are simple enough for such transformations to be possible. Most jellyfish are transparent, nearly invisible in water, hard for predators to see, hard for prey to notice. This transparency comes from being mostly water, from having so little tissue that light passes through easily, from simplicity taken to its extreme. They're ghosts in water, present but barely visible, drifting through the ocean as near nothing, as water shaped temporarily into a life form, as the ocean becoming briefly conscious enough to pulse and drift and sting, but remaining fundamentally ocean, fundamentally water. There's a lesson in jellyfish: you don't need complexity to succeed. Sometimes the simplest approach persists longest, costs least, proves most resilient. Jellyfish don't have brains, but they don't need brains. They don't have hearts, but they don't need hearts. They're stripped down to basics, refined to essentials, successful through minimalism, through being just barely enough to function, but nothing more, nothing wasted, nothing unnecessary. Let yourself become jellyfish simple. Pulse, drift, pulse, drift. Nothing complex, nothing demanding, just the minimum movement needed, just the basic rhythm of rest. Just enough to keep going, but no more than that. No extra effort, no unnecessary complexity. Simple, minimal, barely there. Mostly water, nearly transparent, drifting. Dolphins play. Not just when young adults play too, surfing waves, leaping for no apparent reason, riding bow waves of boats, tossing seaweed, chasing each other, spinning, splashing. They seem to take pleasure in movement, to enjoy their own physical capabilities, to find fun in being dolphins. This playfulness suggests something about dolphin minds. That they have capacity for enjoyment beyond mere survival, that not every behavior serves obvious function, that intelligence creates space for play, for doing things because they're interesting or entertaining rather than because they provide food or safety or reproductive advantage. Watch dolphins riding bow waves, positioning themselves at the pressure wave that forms ahead of a moving boat, surfing this wave, maintaining position with minimal effort, sometimes staying for minutes, sometimes leaping out of the wave and re-entering, sometimes multiple dolphins sharing the wave, taking turns, apparently enjoying the free ride. Or watch dolphins hunting cooperatively surrounding a school of fish, taking turns rushing through the school to feed, communicating with whistles and clicks, coordinating their movements, demonstrating social complexity, intelligence expressed through collaboration. Dolphins are fast swimmers capable of 20 miles per hour sustained, bursts of 30 miles per hour, outpacing most boats, moving through water with power and grace that comes from streamlined bodies, powerful tails, years of practice. They're built for speed, for maneuverability, for efficiency, and they use these capabilities constantly, not just for hunting, but for play, for social interaction, for apparent enjoyment. They're also intelligent brain sizes, relative to body size are second only to humans. Among mammals, complex social structures with individual relationships, tool use in some populations, self-recognition in mirrors suggesting self-awareness. These are minds, consciousness experiencing the world, making decisions, learning, remembering, creating culture that varies between populations. But what strikes observers most is the apparent joy, the leaping that serves no obvious purpose, dolphins bursting from the water, spinning, crashing back down in splashes. The surfing that isn't hunting or traveling but just seems fun. The vocalizations that might be laughter. If dolphins laugh, if the sounds they make during play are their equivalent of human laughter, we can't know what dolphins experience subjectively. We can't ask them if they feel joy, if play is pleasurable, if they're happy, but the behavior suggests something beyond mechanical survival, beyond simple stimulus response. The behaviors suggest an interior life, experiences that include something like happiness, like fun, like the pleasure of moving well in the medium you're designed for. Humans sometimes forget that pleasure is possible, that movement can be enjoyable, that you can do things simply because they feel good rather than because they're productive or necessary. We get stuck in obligation, in shoulds and musts, in forgetting that bodies are capable of joy, that movement through space can be its own reward. Dolphins, remember, they leap and spin and surf because it feels good, because they can, because their bodies are magnificent, and using them well creates experiences worth having. They play because play is valuable, because not everything needs justification beyond enjoyment, because being alive in a body is itself reason enough to celebrate that body's capabilities. Rest now, but remember the dolphins. Remember that your body is capable of pleasure, that movement can be joy, that being alive is sometimes enough reason to leap, to play, to find delight in simple existence. Manta rays don't swim, they fly. Their wing-like pectoral fins flap slowly, powerfully, propelling these enormous fish through water with motions that look exactly like flight, like birds soaring through air, except the medium is water and the birds are fish, massive fish, some with wingspans exceeding 20 feet, gliding through the ocean as eagles glide through sky. The flight is graceful beyond description. Mantas move with apparent effortlessness, flapping slowly on every second or two, gliding between flaps, banking and turning with slight adjustments to wing angle, ascending or descending through small changes in flapping amplitude. They're weightless in water, neutrally buoyant, requiring minimal effort to maintain position, to move, to maneuver through three-dimensional space. They're filter feeders swimming with mouths open, channeling water through gill rakers that trap plankton, eating some of the ocean's smallest organisms despite being among its largest fish. It's a peaceful lifestyle, non-threatening despite their size, gentle giants swimming through plankton swarms, filtering food with the patience of creatures that don't hunt, that don't chase, that just glide and eat what comes to them. Divers who encounter mantas often describe the experience as transcendent. The rays are curious, sometimes approaching divers, sometimes allowing them to swim alongside, to briefly share space with these enormous, gentle creatures. The experience is otherworldly, a fish the size of a car gliding past, close enough to touch, moving with grace that seems impossible for something so large, creating an encounter that feels like meeting an alien intelligence, a mind operating in dimensions humans struggle to imagine. Mantas have the largest brains of any fish, brain-to-body ratios suggesting significant cognitive capacity. They recognize individual humans, remember dive sites, pass behavioral knowledge through populations. These aren't simple creatures. They're complex, possibly intelligent, definitely aware, experiencing their environment and responding to it with what might be thought, might be problem-solving, might be something analogous to mammalian consciousness. But setting intelligence aside, it's the grace that captures attention. The slow wing beats, the effortless gliding, the way they move through water as if gravity doesn't exist, as if water provides no resistance, as if they're not swimming but floating, drifting, existing in space rather than moving through it. Size doesn't prevent grace. Weight doesn't prohibit elegance. Manta rays prove that the largest can be the most graceful, that bulk and beauty coexist, that something weighing hundreds of pounds can move with delicacy, can turn with precision, can fly underwater with the same grace that hummingbirds show in air. Imagine being a manta ray. Imagine the experience of underwater flight, slow wing beats, gliding, water flowing past, plankton entering your mouth, filtered food, no rushing, no chasing, no violence, just flight. Just movement, just existing in the ocean as a flying thing, as water made briefly into wings, as the ocean expressing its own grace through a body that flies. Let that grace infuse you now. Let your breathing become wing beats, slow, powerful, rhythmic. Let your body feel weightless, buoyant, supported by the bed beneath you as mantas are supported by water. Let yourself glide towards sleep with the effortless motion of something designed for flight, something that doesn't fight but flows, doesn't struggle but soars, doesn't resist but rises on currents, it doesn't create but knows how to ride. A newly hatched sea turtle, no bigger than your palm, emerges from sand on a dark beach. It scrambles toward the ocean, guided by light reflecting off water, by the slope of the beach, by instincts encoded in genes passed down through millions of years. It reaches the waves, gets tumbled by surf, finds itself suddenly in the ocean, swimming frantically toward open water, toward safety, away from shore. That tiny turtle is already recording information. Its nervous system is detecting Earth's magnetic field, the invisible lines of force that surround the planet, that vary in intensity and angle depending on location, that create a magnetic map of the entire globe. The turtle's brain contains magnetite microscopic crystals of magnetic iron oxide that respond to these fields, that provide input, allowing the turtle to sense which way is magnetic north, what the field strength is, what the inclination angle is. And specifically, the turtle is imprinting on the magnetic signature of this beach. The unique combination of field intensity and inclination that marks this location, that differs from any other location on Earth, that creates a magnetic address, a set of coordinates written in magnetism rather than latitude and longitude. 25 years later, that turtle, now adult, now sexually mature, now ready to reproduce, will return to this beach. It might have traveled thousands of miles, might have circled the Atlantic Garm multiple times, might have fed off the coast of Africa and South America and North America, but when it's time to nest, it navigates back to this beach, to the place where it hatched, guided by magnetic memory, by the signature imprinted decades earlier, by information recorded by a hatchling smaller than your hand and stored through decades of growth and travel. Scientists have tested this. They've exposed turtles to magnetic fields matching different locations along the Atlantic coast. The turtles respond by orienting in directions that would be appropriate if they were actually at those locations, swimming directions that would take them toward their target beaches if the magnetic field were real. The turtles are using magnetic fields as maps, comparing current field to remembered field, adjusting their swimming direction to reduce the difference, navigating toward a remembered magnetic signature with precision that GPS might envy. This navigation doesn't require thinking in the way humans think. A turtle doesn't consciously remember the beach. It doesn't visualize the location or recall specific events. It simply senses a magnetic signature that matches something encoded in its nervous system, that triggers responses saying home, that guides behavior without requiring conscious thought or memory in the narrative sense. It's built-in navigation, inherited capability, sensing and responding that happens at levels below consciousness, that demonstrates you don't need maps or GPS or even understanding to find your way across oceans, to return to specific beaches, to locate targets with precision after decades and thousands of miles. You just need appropriate sensors, appropriate processing, appropriate responsosol provided by evolution, or refined through millions of years of turtles that successfully navigated breeding with turtles that didn't. creating descendants better and better at using Earth's magnetic field as guide. The turtle doesn't know how it navigates. It doesn't understand magnetism. It just does what it's built to sense, respond, swim, arrive. And that's enough. Sometimes knowing how isn't necessary. Sometimes following instinct, trusting internal guidance, doing what feels right, leads exactly where you need to be. Salmon are born in freshwater streams, small tributaries, sometimes just a few feet wide, flowing through forests or mountains, cold, clear water where eggs were laid in gravel, where young fish spend their first months feeding and growing before migrating to the ocean. They spend years at sea, under 5 years depending on species, ranging across thousands of miles of open ocean, feeding on fish and squid, growing from finger-sized juveniles to adult fish weighing pounds or tens of pounds. During this time, they're ocean fish, adapted to salt water, traveling far from land, living lives completely disconnected from the streams where they hatched. But when it's time to spawn, they return, not to just any stream to their birth stream, to the specific tributary, sometimes to the specific gravel bed where they emerged from eggs years earlier. They navigate from open ocean to the correct river mouth, from the river into the correct tributary, from tributary into the correct small stream, swimming upstream against current, leaping waterfalls, fighting their way to the exact location where their lives began. They navigate by scent. Each stream has a unique chemical, signatured, dissolved minerals from local rocks, organic compounds from specific plants and soils, combinations of chemicals that create an odor, a taste, a signature as unique as a fingerprint. Salmon imprint on this signature as juveniles, memorizing it through their olfactory system, storing it as a pattern their brains will recognize years later. When adult salmon enter freshwater after years at sea, they start testing the water, comparing current scent to remembered scent, choosing routes that increase the similarity, swimming upstream through branches and tributaries, following the scent gradient toward the signature they memorized years before. Each choice point each fork in the stream. They test both options, follow the one that smells more familiar, repeat until they arrive at their birth stream. The chemical memory is remarkably specific. Researchers have tested this by exposing salmon to synthetic chemical mixtures, by transplanting salmon to new streams, by blocking olfactory receptors. In each case, the salmon's navigation suffers. Remove the ability to smell, and salmon can't find their birth streams. Expose them to wrong chemical signatures, and they navigate toward those signatures instead. The navigation is purely chemical, purely olfactory, purely a matter of matching current scent to remembered scent. This creates a kind of homing that's different from turtles' magnetic navigation. Salmon aren't following invisible planetary fields, they're following actual molecules, chemical trails, substances diffusing through water. They're quite literally following their noses, swimming toward water that smells like home, that carries molecules from places they knew, that says this is where you came from in a language of dissolved chemistry. There's something profound about this chemical memory, this scent stored for years, this olfactory map that guides salmon across oceans and up rivers and into streams they haven't seen since they were juveniles. It's memory that bypasses consciousness, that operates through comparison rather than recall, that doesn't require thinking about home but just recognizing it when you smell it, when the water tastes right, when chemistry says, here, this is the place. Home isn't always a visual memory. Sometimes it's a smell, a taste, a chemical signature that your nervous system recognizes even if your conscious mind doesn't remember. Sometimes you don't find home by looking for it, but by following what feels familiar, what smells right, what draws you through, mechanisms deeper than thought. Gray whales migrate annually between feeding grounds in the Arctic and breeding grounds off Mexico, a round trip of about 12,000 miles, one of the longest migrations of any mammal. Humpback whales migrate from polar feeding grounds to tropical breeding areas, crossing entire ocean basins. Blue whales, fin whales, right whales. Right whales, most great whales migrate, moving between regions seasonally, navigating accurately across thousands of miles of featureless ocean. How they navigate remains partially mysterious. They don't follow coastlines, many migrations cross open ocean, out of sight of land for weeks. They don't follow scent, trails ocean currents would disperse any chemical gradient quickly, making scent-based navigation unreliable over large distances. They might use magnetic fields like turtles, but evidence for magnetic sensing in whales is limited and uncertain. One hypothesis involves celestial navigation using stars, sun position, and polarized light patterns to determine direction and location. Whales spend considerable time at the surface, breathing, often visible at night when stars are available. They have large brains, complex cognitive abilities, potentially the capacity to learn and remember star patterns. Some observations support this. Whales often blow-exhale forcefully, creating visible spouts and sequences that might allow them to observe stars. They sometimes appear to orient towards celestial features. Migrating whales maintain remarkably straight courses across open ocean, suggesting some kind of directional reference that remains consistent even when the whale is underwater for extended periods. But celestial navigation requires clear skies, requires seeing stars, requires being at the surface during darkness. Whales spend much time underwater, often in conditions where stars are visible. Cloudy nights, daytime deep dives. So if they use stars, it must be supplemented by other methods, perhaps magnetic sensing, perhaps detecting water temperature gradients, perhaps remembering previous routes, perhaps using a combination of methods that together provide sufficient accuracy. The truth is, we don't know for certain. Whales navigate successfully. That's observable, confirmed by their arrivals at specific locations after migrations of thousands of miles. But the mechanisms remain partially opaque, hidden by the difficulty of observing whale behavior at sea, by the challenge of determining what sensory inputs they're using, by the complexity of studying animals that spend most time underwater, that range across entire ocean basins, that can't be easily tracked or experimentally tested. There's something beautiful about this uncertainty, this admission that we don't fully understand how whales navigate, that these animals possess abilities we can't completely explain, that they're following methods we haven't decoded. It's a reminder that humans don't know everything, that the ocean still holds mysteries, that even animals we've studied for decades can surprise us, can do things we struggle to explain. Whales find their way. Somehow, through mechanisms involving stars or magnetism or memory or senses we haven't identified, they navigate across oceans, arrive at destinations, complete migrations that would be challenging even with modern technology and GPS. They do it with brains, with senses, with abilities evolved over millions of years, with methods that work even if we don't understand them. You have your own navigation internal senses that guide you toward rest, toward sleep, toward the destinations your body needs to reach. You don't need to understand how it works. You just need to trust it, to follow the gentle pull toward rest, to let unconscious systems guide you where you need to be. Sharks can sense electrical fields. Not just strong fields like those around power lines or batteries, but incredibly weak, fields as weak as 5 billionths of a volt per centimeter. This sensitivity is so extreme that sharks can detect the electrical field produced by a flatfish buried in sand, hidden from sight, invisible to other predators, but broadcasting its presence electrically through the normal muscle contractions that maintain life. This ability comes from specialized organs called ampullae of Lorenzini small pores on the shark's snout and head, filled with conductive gel connected to electroreceptor cells that fire when electrical fields are detected. Sharks have hundreds of these ampullae distributed across their heads, creating a distributed sensory array that can detect not just presence but direction and distance of electrical sources. All living tissue produces weak electrical fields. Muscle contractions generate current. Nerve impulses are electrical. Even the chemical gradients across cell membranes create voltages. Animals can't avoid producing these fields. They're inherent to being alive, to having cells that maintain charge differences, to operating through biochemistry that involves moving ions. Sharks evolved to detect these fields, to use them as hunting cues, to find prey that other senses miss. A ray buried under sand is invisible but still electrically active. Its heartbeat creates rhythmic electrical signals. Its gills moving water create current flows. Its muscles maintaining posture generate fields. The shark swims overhead, sweeping its electrical sensors across the sand, detecting the buried ray through its electrical signature, striking with precision guided by electroreception. This sense also allows navigation. Earth's magnetic field creates weak electrical fields in moving seawater, saltwater. Moving through the magnetic field generates current through electromagnetic induction. Sharks detecting these currents can theoretically determine their direction of travel, their speed, their position relative to magnetic features. Experiments confirm that sharks use electroreception for navigation, though the exact mechanisms remain debated. The human world is becoming more electrical. Undersea cables carry electrical current. Ships generate electrical fields. Coastal developments create electrical noise. This might interfere with sharks' electroreception, might create confusion, might affect their ability to hunt and navigate. We're polluting the ocean not just with physical trash and chemical contaminants, but with electrical noise, with fields that might be overwhelming sharks' sensitive electroreceptors, creating an environment different from anything their evolution prepared them for. But in quiet waters, away from human electrical activity, sharks still swim with this ancient sense, active, detecting fields we can't perceive, navigating by electrical gradients we don't experience, hunting using sensory information our nervous systems aren't equipped to process. They're perceiving a dimension of reality we're blind to, sensing the electromagnetic world that surrounds all life, but that most animals ignore. Your body generates electrical fields too. Your heartbeat creates rhythmic signals. Your neurons firing create electrical activity. The ion flows across your cell. Membranes generate voltages. You're electrically active, broadcasting your presence in a language that sharks would understand, but that you're usually unconscious of. As you rest, your electrical activity changes. Brainwaves shift from beta to alpha to theta, from the high-frequency activity of waking to the slower rhythms of sleep. Your heartbeat steadies. Your muscles relax, reducing their electrical noise. You're becoming electrically quieter, settling into the low-activity state that sleep requires, broadcasting through your electrical signature that you're resting, that you're safe, that you're allowing systems to idle. Seabirds hunt by watching the ocean surface. From hundreds of feet in the air, they scan for signs of fish schools, below-surface disturbances, color changes, splashing, anything that indicates prey concentration. And they've learned that certain patterns mean fish. Boiling water from a school feeding at the surface, diving seabirds from other species already feeding, dolphins herding fish, even subtle changes in water texture that indicate fish moving just below the surface. The fish, meanwhile, are often herded by predators. Below tuna, sharks, dolphins, pushing baitfish schools upward toward the surface, trapping them against the air-water boundary, attacking from below while the fish have nowhere to escape upward. The baitfish school tightly, trying to create confusion, to make it harder for predators to target individuals, bunching together in silvery balls that roil and twist near the surface. This creates feeding frenzy as simultaneous attacks from below and above, tuna and dolphins driving from beneath while seabirds dive from above, all converging on the trapped baitfish school, creating chaos visible for miles, drawing in more predators as birds spot the activity from the air and fly toward it, as sharks detect vibrations in the water, as more tuna join the attack. The surface becomes a zone of interaction, a boundary where airborne and aquatic predators meet, where the ocean's productivity becomes visible to aerial observers, where connections between sea and sky manifest physically as birds plunge into water and fish leap into air, as two realms overlap in their shared interest in the concentrated prey. These feeding events create visible sign soil slicks from fish scales and tissue, floating debris from consumed prey, flocks of seabirds sitting on the water, sometimes just changes in water color or surface texture that experienced observers recognize. Fishermen watch for these signs, knowing that where seabirds feed, larger fish are below, that the birds are indicators of ocean productivity, guides to where fishing might be good. The connection between birds and fish demonstrates that ocean boundaries are permeable. That surface isn't a barrier but an interface. That what happens below affects what happens above, and vice versa. The ocean and atmosphere aren't separate systems. They interact constantly, exchange heat and gases and moisture and even organisms, create coupled systems where changes in one realm propagate into the other. You exist at boundaries too, between waking and sleeping, between consciousness and unconsciousness, between activity and rest. These aren't separate states but interfaces, zones where one condition gives way to another, where characteristics of both are present simultaneously, where you're neither fully one nor fully other but transitioning, crossing, moving between realms. The ocean's surface is like this, neither water nor air, but the place where they meet, where both are present, where exchanges happen, where the properties of both realms overlap and interact. You're at your own surface now, floating at the boundary between wake and sleep, between the realm where consciousness dominates and the realm where dreams take over, between the world of sensation and the world of internal experience. The boundary is thin, the crossing is gentle, and on the other side waits the deep ocean of sleep, the realm below consciousness where you'll spend the next hours held by currents you don't control, drifting through experiences you won't remember, resting in depths where the surface world doesn't penetrate. Sharks kill fewer than 10 people per year worldwide. Compare this to mosquitoes, which kill hundreds of thousands, or hippos, which kill hundreds, or bees, or deer causing car accidents, or cows. By any statistical measure, sharks are among the least dangerous animals you're likely to encounter, far less dangerous than many animals we don't fear at all. Most shark species are completely harmless to humans. Of the roughly 500 shark species, only about a dozen have ever been implicated in unprovoked attacks on humans. The rest are too small, too deep-dwelling, or simply not interested in large animals as prey. Many sharks are shy, avoiding humans whenever possible, swimming away when divers approach. Even the species capable of harming humans rarely do so. Great white sharks, tiger sharks, and bull sharks account for most attacks, but even these species attack humans extremely rarely relative to how often humans enter the water. Millions of people swim in oceans every day. Sharks encounter humans regularly. Yet attacks remain extraordinarily rare, suggesting that sharks are not perceiving humans as prey, not seeking us out, not interested in eating us. Most attacks appear to be cases of mistaken identity. Surfers on boards resemble seals from below the silhouette, is similar, especially in murky water. A shark investigating what it thinks might be prey makes an exploratory bite, realizes the object isn't food, and releases it, This is tragedy for the human who may be badly injured, but it's not predation. The shark isn't trying to eat the person it's investigating, realizes its mistake, and leaves. Sharks are cautious animals. They're apex predators, but they're not invulnerable. An injury that would be minor to a human, a broken bone, a torn muscle, can be fatal to a shark, preventing it from swimming efficiently, from hunting successfully, from surviving. So sharks assess prey carefully, avoid risky situations, prefer prey they recognize, and know how to handle efficiently. Humans are unfamiliar, large, sometimes aggressive when approached, not worth the risk when seals or fish are available. Statistics support this. In areas with high shark populations and high human use like Southern California, Florida, Australia, attacks remain rare, despite thousands of daily interactions between sharks and swimmers. Sharks are present, are swimming near beaches, are in the water with humans constantly, yet choose not to attack, choose to avoid humans, choose to hunt their normal prey instead. The fear of sharks is disproportionate to the actual danger. We fear them because they're alien, because they're powerful, because attacks, when they occur, are dramatic and frightening. We fear them because movies have portrayed them as mindless killers, because sensational news coverage amplifies every attack, because we're not adapted to be comfortable in water, and predators in that environment trigger primal fears. But the reality is that sharks are discriminating predators, cautious animals, and have little interest in humans as prey. You're safer swimming in the ocean with sharks present than driving to the beach. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than bitten by a shark. The ocean, with its sharks, is statistically one of the safest places you can be. Fear not the sharks. They're not hunting you. They're hunting fish, hunting seals, going about their lives in the ocean they've inhabited for hundreds of millions of years. You're just a visitor, passing through, barely noticed, of no interest to creatures that have better things to do than chase unfamiliar, bony, not particularly tasty primates. The jellyfish has no brain. It has no eyes, no ears, no centralized processing of any kind. Its nervous system is a net distributed neurons throughout its tissue, creating simple reflexes, allowing contraction and expansion for swimming, allowing tentacles to retract when touched, but providing nothing like the sensory processing that would enable targeting, planning, or pursuing prey. A jellyfish can't see you. It can't hear you approaching. It doesn't know you exist until you make physical contact with its tentacles. It's not hunting you, not chasing you, not trying to sting you. It's just drifting, pulsing slowly to maintain position or to move vertically, trailing tentacles that will sting anything that touches them, because that's what tentacles do: respond to contact by firing stinging cells, automatically, reflexively, without decision or intent. The stinging cells, nematocysts, are triggered by touch and certain chemical signals. They're spring-loaded capsules containing coiled threads with barbs and venom. When triggered, they fire like tiny harpoons, faster than a bullet, penetrating skin, injecting venom, all in a fraction of a millisecond. One tentacle might have thousands of nematocysts. Contact with a tentacle might trigger hundreds of them simultaneously. But this is defense, not attack. Jellyfish use stinging cells to capture small prey plankton, small fish that brush against tentacles. The venom paralyzes the prey, allowing the jellyfish to bring it to its mouth using the same tentacles. Humans who contact tentacles are triggering the same defensive mechanism, but we're not prey. We're far too large, far too difficult to consume. The sting is wasted on us, serves no purpose for the jellyfish, benefits it in no way. Most jellyfish stings are mild, painful, perhaps causing welts or rashes, but not dangerous. Only a few species have venom potent enough to seriously harm humans. Box jellyfish in Australian waters can be lethal. Portuguese man-of-war, technically not a jellyfish but a colonial organism, can cause severe pain. But the vast majority of jellyfish you might encounter, moon jellies, comb jellies, most common coastal species-shaped stings you barely feel. Venom too weak to penetrate human skin effectively, or no stinging cells at all. Jellyfish are not interested in you. They can't be interested. They have no brain to generate interest, no sensory systems to detect you at a distance, no capacity for targeting or pursuing. You're in their space, and if you bump into their tentacles, you'll be stung automatically. But this is your fault, not theirs. You ran into them. They're just drifting, being jellyfish, trailing tentacles that sting whatever touches them because that's their evolutionary strategy, their way of being in the ocean. Avoid jellyfish when you see them. Don't touch tentacles, even apparently dead jellyfish washed up on beaches. The nematocysts can still fire, but don't fear them. They're not malicious, not aggressive, not hunting. They're simple animals doing simple things, pulsing, drifting, stinging reflexively, living lives of minimal complexity in the ocean that has held them for over 500 million years. The ocean contains dangers, yes, but most of them are passive, are responses rather than attacks, are consequences of human contact with organisms that evolved long before humans existed, that aren't adapted to our presence, that respond to us the same way they respond to anything automatically, reflexively, without thought or intention. The ocean's actual dangers aren't the charismatic ones. Not sharks, not jellyfish, not giant squid or venomous fish. The real dangers are more mundane, more statistical, more related to physics than biology. Rip currents kill more people than all marine animals combined. These are powerful, narrow currents, flowing from shore back out to sea, formed when water that waves push toward the beach finds a channel to return seaward. The current can be faster than even strong swimmers can swim against, sometimes 5 miles per hour, or more, pulling swimmers away from shore, creating panic, causing exhaustion and drowning. But rip currents aren't trying to kill you. They're just water returning to the sea, following the path of least resistance. If you're caught in one, you don't fight it. You swim parallel to shore, escaping the narrow current, then swim back to beach once you're out of the rip. Fighting the current directly exhausts you, makes drowning more likely. The current isn't malicious, it's just water flowing, doing what water does. Cold water is dangerous too. Even moderately cold water, 60 or 70 degrees Fahrenheit, conducts heat away from your body much faster than air at the same temperature. Hypothermia can develop within an hour in cold water, even faster in very cold water. Your muscles lose function, your thinking becomes impaired, your swimming ability decreases, and eventually you can't keep yourself afloat. But cold water isn't attacking you. It's just cold, obeying thermodynamics, conducting heat according to physical laws that don't care about your comfort or survival. Wear a wetsuit in cold water. Limit your time. Get out before you're too cold to function. The danger is predictable, manageable, entirely about physics rather than malice. Waves can be dangerous, especially shore break, where waves break directly on the beach in shallow water. These waves hit hard, can slam you into sand or rocks, can cause spinal injuries, can hold you underwater briefly if you're caught in the wrong place. But waves aren't targeting you. They're just energy reaching shore, breaking when the depth-to-wave height ratio reaches a critical point, following equations that predict their behavior with precision. Undertow backwash of water after waves break calm, pull you off your feet, drag you briefly seaward. It's not trying to capture you, it's just water returning to the ocean, flowing downslope, following gravity. Stand firm, wait for it to pass, then regain your footing. The ocean's dangers are understandable, manageable with knowledge and caution. They're not personal, not targeted, not malicious. They're physics, water moving according to pressure gradients and gravity, temperature following thermodynamic laws, currents flowing according to fluid dynamics. Respect these dangers, but don't fear them irrationally. Learn the patterns, understand the mechanics, make informed decisions, and the ocean becomes safer, more predictable, less threatening. The real danger is ignorance, is not understanding how water behaves, is panicking when you should stay calm, is fighting when you should flow with currents and escape at angles. Knowledge provides safety. Understanding creates confidence. And the ocean, properly approached with respect and awareness, reveals itself as powerful but not malevolent, dangerous but not evil, capable of harm but not seeking it. Swim in the ocean, and most organisms will ignore you completely. Fish school past without paying attention. Sea turtles continue feeding, occasionally glancing at you but showing no fear or aggression. Dolphins might investigate briefly, then lose interest and return to hunting. Even sharks, when present, typically swim by without approaching, interested in their own business, unconcerned with the strange, large animal that swims so awkwardly. This indifference is profound and somewhat humbling. You're not the center of the ocean's attention. You're not interesting to most marine life. You're a visitor in their space, tolerated or ignored, rarely worth the energy of investigation, almost never perceived as threat or food or anything requiring response. Fish don't scatter when you approach unless you move aggressively or create vibrations that suggest predator activity. They assess you visually, determine you're not a threat, and continue what they were doing, feeding, schooling, resting. You're just a large, slow-moving object, harmless, boring, not worth fleeing from. Marine mammals are more curious but still ultimately indifferent. A seal might approach to investigate, might swim close enough to make eye contact, might circle you briefly before deciding you're uninteresting and leaving. Dolphins might bow ride if you're on a boat, might approach swimmers occasionally, but they're playing or curious rather than threatened or aggressive. The interaction is on their terms, ends when they choose, reflects their complete lack of concern about your presence. Even territorial fish toes defending nesting sites or coral heads typically display rather than attack. They might swim toward you with fins extended, might make bluffing rushes, but actual contact is rare. They're trying to intimidate, trying to convince you to leave without requiring them to fight. And usually, if you just maintain position or back away slightly, they're satisfied and return to their territory, accepting that you're not a serious threat. This indifference is actually reassuring. It means the ocean isn't hostile, isn't full of creatures eager to attack humans, isn't the dangerous place that some media portrayals suggest. Most organisms are focused on their own survival, finding food, avoiding predators, reproducing. You're irrelevant to these concerns, uninteresting to creatures that have evolved in environments where humans didn't exist, that have no evolutionary history of human interaction, that perceive you as just another large object in their environment, unusual but not threatening. The ocean is busy with its own life. Fish are hunting plankton, crabs are scavenging, eels are hiding in crevices, octopuses are changing color, turtles are grazing on seagrass, whales are diving after squid. All of this activity continues whether you're present or not, requires nothing from you, barely notices you. The ocean's inhabitants are living their lives, and you're just swimming through, a temporary visitor, a witness to activity that predates human existence and will continue long after you've left. This is peaceful, ultimately. You're not important here. You're not the focus. The ocean doesn't revolve around you, doesn't respond to you, doesn't care whether you stay or leave. And that's liberating, to be in a place where you don't matter, where you can observe without affecting, where your presence changes nothing, where you can simply exist in space that belongs to others and will never be yours. For all the cautions, for all the respect the ocean requires, it also welcomes you. Water holds you, supports your weight with buoyancy that makes floating effortless. The ocean cools you on hot days, cleanses you, refreshes you. The salt content makes you more buoyant than in fresh water. You float better, tire less quickly, can rest on the surface with minimal effort. Swimming in the ocean is returning home in a sense. All life came from the ocean originally. The first cells formed in seawater. The first complex organisms evolved in the ocean. Fish developed fins and nervous systems and eyes in the ocean. Eventually, some organisms crawled onto land, adapted to air, became the terrestrial life that dominates now. But the ocean was first, was home for billions of years before land became habitable. Your blood still reflects this oceanic origin. Its salt concentration is similar to seawater, not identical, not as high, but similar enough to demonstrate the connection, to show that life carries the ocean internally, that every cell exists in a personal sea, that you're fundamentally aquatic even though you live on land. When you enter the ocean, you're returning to the ancestral environment. Your body knows this water, recognizes it, responds to it with ancient reflexes. The mammalian dive reflex slows your heart when your face enters cold water, preparing your body for aquatic conditions. Your skin recognizes salt water, tolerates it, functions in it. Your buoyancy in seawater approximates neutral. You float with minimal effort, requiring only small adjustments to maintain position, as if your body remembers a time when it belonged here, when water was home. The ocean offers exploration without end. Every dive reveals something a fish you didn't see before, a crab hiding in a crevice, light patterns on sand, the way currents move, seaweed. The ocean is inexhaustible, infinite in detail, always offering more than you can observe, more than you can understand, more than you can experience, even in a lifetime of ocean swimming. And the ocean forgives. Unlike land, where you leave footprints and disturb vegetation and create lasting marks, the ocean accepts your presence and erases it. Swim through water and moments later there's no evidence you were there. The water closes behind you, fills your wake, returns to its previous state. You can't scar the ocean, can't damage it by swimming in it, can't leave permanent marks. You're a temporary presence, here and then gone, noticed and then forgotten, part of the flow and then separate from it. The ocean invites you to enter without consequences, to swim without guilt, to exist in space that will erase your presence as soon as you leave. It offers weightlessness, offers support, offers cooling and cleaning and the simple pleasure of immersion. It asks only respect in return, respect for its power, respect for its inhabitants, respect for currents and cold and conditions that can be dangerous if you're careless. Accept the invitation. Wade into the shallows, dive beneath the surface, swim in the salt water that your cells remember, that your ancestors emerged from, that remains fundamentally welcoming despite its power. The ocean is not your enemy. It's your origin, your ancient home, the place where life learned to be alive. Below 1,000 meters, about 3,300 feet, no sunlight penetrates. Not dim light, not faint blue glow, but absolute darkness. Complete absence of solar illumination, blackness as total as the darkest cave, as the deepest mine shaft, as any place on Earth where light never reaches. This darkness isn't threatening to organisms adapted to it. For deep-sea creatures, this is normal illumination, or rather normal absence of illumination. They've evolved in darkness for millions of years, have adapted to conditions where light doesn't exist, where eyes become useless for detecting sunlight, where other senses dominate. Many deep-sea organisms have no eyes at all. Eyes are expensive metabolically, requiring energy to maintain, to process visual information, to construct the specialized proteins and structures that detect light. In permanent darkness, eyes provide no benefit, so evolution has removed them from many species, redirecting that metabolic investment to other systems-enhanced chemical senses, vibration detection, electroreception. Other deep-sea organisms have enormous eyes, seemingly contradicting the trend. But these huge eyes aren't for seeing sunlight. They're for detecting bioluminescence, the light that other organisms produce. In darkness, even tiny amounts of light matter. A large eye collects more photons, detects fainter glows, sees bioluminescent organisms from greater distances. These eyes are optimized for darkness, for detecting the occasional flash or glow, not for vision in the way surface-dwelling animals use vision. The darkness creates a different sensory world. Without light, without the visual information that dominates surface life, deep-sea organisms rely on other cues. They sense vibrations through lateral lines, detecting movements through water. They taste chemicals in current, following scent trails to prey or mates. They detect electrical fields, sensing the bioelectric activity of living tissue. They use bioluminescence to communicate, to hunt, to avoid predators, creating light only when needed, maintaining darkness as the default state. Is profound quiet in this darkness, not silence. The ocean always carries sound, but stillness, calm, the absence of activity that characterizes environments where energy is scarce, where life proceeds slowly, where the frantic pace of sunlit surface waters doesn't apply. Darkness like this can be peaceful if you adjust your expectations, if you stop demanding light, if you accept that darkness is a state rather than a problem. In deep-sea darkness, there's nothing to see in the visual sense, but that doesn't mean there's nothing present. Life continues. Organisms exist, the ecosystem functions, all in complete darkness, all without requiring light, proving that illumination isn't necessary for existence, that life finds ways to persist in any stable environment, even environments where the sun's energy never reaches. As you rest here, your room might be dark or lit, but your closed eyes create darkness regardless. Behind your eyelids, even in a lit room, there's darkness. And this darkness is comfortable, familiar, restful. You don't fear it. You seek it for sleep, created with curtains and closed eyes, need it for rest. The deep ocean's darkness is like this, not threatening, just dark, just the absence of light that allows other things to matter, that creates conditions where rest is possible, where activity slows, where the energy of daylight doesn't disturb the profound stillness of deep places. At the ocean's surface, pressure is 1 atmosphere 1.7 pounds per square inch, the weight of the entire atmospheric column pressing down. But so familiar, you never notice it. Descend into water, and pressure increases by 1 atmosphere every 33 feet on. Additional atmosphere at 33 feet deep, 2 additional atmospheres at 66 feet, 3 at 99 feet. At 1,000 meters deep, about 3,300 feet pressure is roughly 100 atmospheres, 470 pounds per square inch. At 4,000 meters, typical abyssal plane depth pressure reaches 400 atmospheres, nearly 6,000 pounds per square inch. At the deepest point in the oceanic Challenger, deep in the Mariana Trench at nearly 11,000 meters, pressure exceeds 1,000 atmospheres, over 16,000 pounds per square inch, more than 8 tons per square inch. This sounds crushing, sounds unsurvivable, sounds like pressure that would destroy anything subjected to it. And it would destroy air-filled spaces. Lungs would collapse, air pockets would compress to nothing, gas-filled swim bladders would be squeezed to negligible volume. But many organisms don't have air-filled spaces. Their bodies are liquid and solid tissue, incompressible materials that don't change volume under pressure. Water can't be compressed. Significantly, pressure affects its properties slightly, but doesn't shrink it the way gases compress. So organisms made primarily of water and tissue experience high pressure, but aren't crushed by it because there's nothing to crush, no air spaces to collapse, no compressible components. Deep-sea fish have no swim bladders, or have oil-filled swim bladders where oil's slight compressibility is compensated by the bladder's structure. Their bodies are the same density as surrounding water. They're neutrally buoyant without gas-filled structures, without creating pressure differences between inside and outside that would be difficult to maintain. These organisms experience pressure as normal. To them, 400 atmospheres is baseline, is what they've always known, is comfortable. Bringing them to the surface would be traumatic. The sudden decrease in pressure would cause dissolved gases to come out of solution, creating bubbles in tissue, destroying cells, killing the organism. Deep-sea creatures brought to surface die not from lack of pressure, but from its absence, from conditions their bodies aren't adapted to, from returning to normal. Surface pressure that's abnormal to them. Pressure at depth isn't crushing, it's holding. Its support, presence, the weight of water creating conditions that deep-sea organisms are adapted to, that they require. that they can't survive without. The pressure isn't hostile, it's necessary, it's home, it's the environment these creatures evolved in and can't exist outside of. There's a metaphor here for other forms of pressure. What feels crushing might be holding. What seems overwhelming might be necessary. What appears as weight pressing down might actually be support, structure, the conditions required for your current form of existence. You're experiencing your own pressure, the weight of atmosphere, the pull of gravity, the compression of the bed against your body. These aren't crushing you, they're holding you, supporting you, providing the tactile feedback that lets you know where you are in space, that grounds you, that creates the sense of being held. Pressure becomes comfortable when it's familiar, when you're adapted to it, when it's simply the conditions of your existence rather than something unusual. The deep ocean teaches this. What seems impossible to withstand becomes normal to inhabit, becomes home, becomes the only condition that works. Deep ocean water hovers just above freezing, typically 35 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that you'd lose consciousness within minutes if exposed to it, cold enough to numb extremities in seconds, cold enough to kill through hypothermia within an hour. But to deep-sea organisms, this is comfortable temperature, is what their biochemistry is optimized for, is the thermal environment their enzymes function in, their membranes remain fluid in, their metabolisms operate at. They're cold-blooded, meaning their body temperature matches the surrounding water, meaning they're as cold as the deep ocean, meaning their cells operate at temperatures that would shut down mammalian cells, would crystallize mammalian blood, would stop warm-blooded hearts. The cold slows everything. Metabolic rates at these temperatures are a fraction of surface rates. Chemical reactions proceed more slowly. Enzymes work less quickly. Growth happens over years instead of months, over decades instead of years. Deep-sea fish might take 20 years to reach maturity, might live 100 years or more, experiencing time at a pace that makes surface life seem frantic, rushed, exhausting. But slow isn't bad in an environment where food is scarce. If you eat rarely, perhaps once a week, once a month, you need a metabolism that matches that feeding schedule, that doesn't burn through energy reserves quickly, that allows survival between meals. Cold water creates that metabolism, slows processes to match food availability, makes patient waiting viable. The cold also preserves. Organic matter decomposes slowly in cold water. Bacteria that would break down a dead fish in days in warm water take weeks or months in the deep cold. Shipwrecks remain intact for centuries because wood-boring organisms and rapid decay don't occur at these temperatures. The Titanic sits in cold, deep water, deteriorating but slowly, better preserved than it would be in shallow, warm water where biological activity would have disassembled it within decades. Even bones last longer in cold, deep water. Whale falls, dead whales that sink to the seafloor can support communities of organisms for decades, the bones decomposing so slowly that they provide substrate and nutrients for years, creating oases in the deep ocean, attracting scavengers and bacteria and organisms specialized to exploit these rare concentrations of organic matter. Cold preserves memory too, in a way. Deep water that sank from the surface centuries ago carries with it the temperature, the dissolved gases, the chemical signature of the era when it last contacted atmosphere. That water is a time capsule, preserving information about past ocean conditions, about climate states from centuries ago, readable through careful analysis, available because the cold prevented mixing and alteration, kept the water's properties stable across centuries. There's comfort in cold that preserves, in temperature that slows decay, that allows things to last, that creates conditions where change happens so slowly that stability dominates. The deep ocean is stable, temperature barely varies, conditions remain consistent, environment persists unchanged across centuries. Your body cools slightly as you sleep, dropping a degree or two below waking temperature, entering a state of reduced metabolism, of slower processes, of conservation rather than expenditure. This cooling is healthy, is normal, is part of how sleep works, how the body rests, how restoration happens. You're approaching your own cold water state, your own preservation mode, your own slowed metabolism that allows rest and repair. In 1977, scientists exploring the deep Pacific in the submersible Alvin discovered something unexpected. Underwater hot springs on the ocean floor, superheated water emerging from Earth's crust, and surrounding these vents, dense communities of organisms stew, worms, clams, crabs, fish thriving in the deep ocean where food should be scarce, where life should be sparse, where the sunlit surface is too far above to provide much sustenance. These hydrothermal vents occur where tectonic plates are spreading apart, where magma from Earth's mantle rises close to the seafloor, where seawater seeps into cracks in the crust, gets heated to extreme temperatures, sometimes exceeding 750 degrees Fahrenheit, and emerges as superheated plumes carrying dissolved minerals from deep in the earth. The water emerging from vents is hot enough to melt lead, but it cools rapidly as it mixes with surrounding frigid seawater, creating temperature gradients where organisms can position themselves in water of tolerable temperature, close enough to the vent to access the chemicals it provides, but far enough to avoid being cooked. The chemicals matter because they provide energy. Vent water is rich in hydrogen sulfide, methane, and other reduced chemicals. On the surface, these chemicals would be toxic. Hydrogen sulfide is the smell of rotten eggs, is poisonous at low concentrations. But in the deep ocean, these chemicals are fuel. Specialized bacteria oxidize them, combine them with oxygen dissolved in seawater, and use the energy released to create organic matter from carbon dioxide, performing chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis, capturing chemical energy instead of solar energy, creating food from minerals and dissolved gases instead of from sunlight. These bacteria form the base of vent ecosystems. Some live free in the water. Others live symbiotically inside the tissues of larger organisms, giant tube worms, vent clams, vent mussels, providing their hosts with nutrition in exchange for access to both the sulfideric vent water and the oxygen-rich seawater. The tube worms have no mouth, no digestive system. They're entirely dependent on their bacterial symbionts, essentially farming bacteria inside specialized organs, exchanging raw materials for food molecules. The result is oases in the deep patches of dense life surrounding vents, contrasting dramatically with the sparse communities on the surrounding seafloor. Where typical deep-sea floor might have one organism per square meter, vent communities have hundreds per square meter, packed densely around the chemical energy source, exploiting the only local energy input for hundreds of miles. Vents demonstrate that life doesn't require sunlight, that alternative energy sources can support complex ecosystems, that chemosynthesis can substitute for photosynthesis, that independence from the sun is possible. This has profound implications for the search for life elsewhere on Jupiter's moon, Europa, where an ocean exists beneath ice, where no sunlight penetrates but where hydrothermal vents might exist. If life can thrive at Earth's vents without sunlight, perhaps it can thrive in Europa's dark ocean too. The deep ocean isn't barren. Even in darkness, even in cold, even far from the sun's energy, life persists, finding alternative energy sources, exploiting chemical gradients, thriving in conditions that seem impossible. Life is resourceful, adaptable, persistent, finding ways to exist in any environment stable enough to support chemistry, creative enough to discover any energy gradient, and exploit it. The Mariana Trench's Challenger Deep is the deepest known point in the ocean, 10,994 meters below the surface, nearly 7 miles down. Deeper than Mount Everest is tall. So deep that if you dropped a stone from the surface, it would take over an hour to reach the bottom, sinking through darkness, through pressure increasing with every meter, through water that few organisms call home. At this depth, pressure exceeds 1,000 atmospheres. Temperature hovers just above freezing. No sunlight have penetrated here in millions of years. The distance to the surface over 6 miles straight up seems insurmountable, seems impossibly far, seems like a separation that should make this place completely isolated from surface world. Yet life exists, even here. In 1960, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh descended to Challenger, deep in the bathyscaphe Trieste, becoming the first humans to visit the deepest ocean. Looking out their viewport, they saw a flat fisher creature living at the deepest point on Earth, surviving at pressures that would crush any air-filled space, in darkness that's absolute, in cold that's nearly freezing. Subsequent expeditions, robotic and crew, have confirmed life at these depths. Amphipods, snailfish, sea cucumbers, bacteria organisms adapted to extreme pressure, to cold, to darkness, to scarcity. These creatures prove that even the most extreme ocean environments support life, that no stable environment is too harsh for evolution to find solutions, that life is more persistent than we typically imagine. The organisms here are adapted specifically to these conditions. They can't survive elsewhere, bringing them to the surface. They die from pressure decrease, from exposure to conditions their evolution never prepared them for. They're not just living at extreme depth, they're requiring extreme depth adapted so specifically that they can't exist anywhere else. The deep trenches are also where organic matter finally comes to rest. Marine snow that began as dead plankton at the surface, that drifted down for weeks, that was eaten and excreted and decomposed during its descent, finally settles on trench floors, accumulating as sediment, providing food for deposit feeders, being buried layer by layer, becoming part of the geological record, creating sedimentary rocks that will someday, millions of years, hence be uplifted and exposed, revealing in their chemistry the story of what the ocean was like, what organisms existed, what carbon dioxide concentrations were, what the climate was when these sediments formed. The deepest ocean is also the quietest, the most isolated, the most stable. Conditions here change on geological timescales, millions of years, not on human timescales. The darkness, the cold, the pressure, the scarcity have persisted essentially unchanged since the trench formed, creating an environment more constant than almost anywhere on Earth's surface, more predictable than surface oceans, more stable than the atmosphere. This deep place is where your metaphorical descent ends. This is the depth of sleep you're approaching, the deepest rest, the most complete release of consciousness, the state where you're most separated from waking world, most insulated from surface concerns, most deeply resting in the cold, dark, pressurized peace that is profound sleep. Descend to this depth. Let the pressure hold you. Let the cold preserve you. Let the darkness enclose you. Let the silence surround you. Rest at the deepest point, where everything is still, where nothing demands your attention, where you can simply exist without effort, held by conditions that support your being without requiring your participation. There's technically only one ocean. The divisions we name Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Arctic, Southern Air, human constructs, naming conventions for regions of one continuous body of water that circles the globe, that touches every continent, that connects all coastlines into one aquatic system. Water flows between these named oceans freely. The Pacific connects to the Atlantic through the Drake Passage around South America's southern tip, through the Arctic Ocean to the north. The Atlantic connects to the Indian Ocean around Africa's southern tip. The Indian Ocean connects to the Pacific through the Indonesian Straits. All are linked. All exchange water continuously. All participate in the global circulation that makes them one system rather than separate seas. A water molecule in the Pacific might circulate to the Atlantic, spend time in the Indian Ocean, pass through the Arctic, eventually return to the Pacific. The journey might take centuries, but it's possible. It happens. It demonstrates that ocean boundaries are arbitrary, that water recognizes no divisions, that the ocean is fundamentally singular despite our habit of treating it as plural. This unity means ocean health is global. Pollution entering the ocean anywhere eventually spreads everywhere. Plastic in the Pacific ends up in the Atlantic. Oil spilled in one region eventually circulates to others. Ocean acidification from atmospheric carbon dioxide affects all oceans because they all share the same atmosphere, all absorb carbon dioxide, all experience the same chemical changes. It also means ocean benefits are global. The oxygen produced by phytoplankton in one ocean basin circulates through atmosphere globally. The heat absorbed by one ocean region eventually spreads to others through currents. The fish that spawn in one region might migrate to others, carrying nutrients and energy across ocean basins, connecting ecosystems through their movements. Humans have always understood this unity at some level. Ancient Polynesians navigated across the Pacific understanding that all islands were connected by the same water, that the ocean was one system that could be crossed if you understood its winds and currents. European sailors explored different oceans but recognized they were navigating one connected water body, that you could sail from any ocean to any other without leaving salt water. The ocean's unity creates responsibility. What happens in one part affects all parts. Protection of ocean health can't be local. Only it requires global cooperation, shared commitment, recognition that we all depend on the same ocean, that we all contribute to its degradation or preservation, that national boundaries don't partition the ocean in ways that matter to ocean processes. But the unity also creates hope. Good things spread too. Protected areas in one region can seed larvae that travel to other regions. Recovered fish populations can expand their ranges. Successful conservation approaches can be adopted globally. The ocean's connectivity means both problems and solutions propagate, that nothing is purely local, that what we do anywhere can eventually affect everywhere. You're connected to this one ocean through the water you drink, the air you breathe, the food you eat, the climate you experience. The ocean is part of your life, whether you live near coast or far inland, whether you swim regularly or have never touched salt water. The ocean cycles water and generates weather and produces oxygen and regulates climate, affecting every human everywhere, making us all ocean dependent, all connected through this one body of water that surrounds and supports and sustains. The ocean is old. Not just old in the sense of having existed for a long time, though it has about 4 billion years, but old in the sense of containing ancient materials, of preserving things, of remembering. The water itself is ancient. Some of it has been water since Earth formed, has cycled through ocean and atmosphere and ice and rivers and organisms billions of times, has been part of countless creatures, has evaporated and rained and flowed and frozen and melted over and over, but has remained water, has remained molecules, the same substance responding to the same physical laws across billions of years. The salt in the ocean is ancient too. It came originally from rocks eroding on land, minerals dissolving in rainwater, flowing to the ocean through rivers, accumulating over geological time. The ocean has been getting saltier throughout Earth's history, slowly concentrating dissolved minerals, becoming the brine that now contains about 35 grams of salt per kilogram of water, making seawater 3.5% salt, making it taste unmistakably oceanic, making it unsuitable for drinking, but perfect for the organisms adapted to it. Some of the salt came from hydrothermal vents, from minerals dissolved out of seafloor rocks by hot water released into the ocean when that water emerges from vents. Some came from volcanic eruptions, from gases and ash adding elements to the ocean. Some came from space, from comets and meteorites adding their materials to Earth's inventory. The ocean is a collection point, a sink where everything dissolved ends up eventually, accumulating, mixing, creating a solution that contains traces of nearly every element, samples of Earth's composition dissolved in water. The ocean also contains physical memory. Seafloor sediments preserve the shells of organisms that lived millions of years ago. These shells are made of calcium carbonate, which incorporates oxygen isotopes in ratios that depend on temperature. By analyzing the oxygen isotope ratios in ancient shells, scientists can reconstruct ocean temperatures from millions of years ago, can determine what the climate was like, whether Earth was in ice age or warm period, how much ice existed at the poles. The sediments also preserve pollen blown from land and deposited in ocean sediments, revealing what plants existed on nearby continents. They preserve volcanic ash layers, marking eruptions. They preserve changes in sedimentation rate, indicating changes in erosion or sea level. The ocean floor is a library, a historical record, a memory of Earth's past written in layers of mud and shells and chemical signatures. Even the water's chemistry preserves information. Deep water that sank centuries ago carries with it the dissolved gases it absorbed when last at the surface. By analyzing these gases, their ratios, their isotope scientists can determine when that water was last at the surface, what the atmospheric composition was at that time, how conditions have changed since. The ocean remembers because water preserves, because sediments accumulate, because chemistry records information, because physical processes leave traces. The ocean is witness to Earth's history, participant in that history, carrier of information about past climates and past life and past events that would be lost without the ocean's patient preservation. You're made of this ancient water, these ancient elements. The water in your cells has been recycled through Earth's systems countless times, has been ocean water, has been rain, has been river water, has been ice, has been drunk by countless organisms before you. Your temporary arrangement of ancient materials, brief pattern made from substances older than complex life, older than land plants, older than almost anything currently living on Earth. Life began in the ocean. This is scientific consensus, supported by geological evidence, by the fossil record, by the chemistry of the earliest preserved rocks. The first cells formed in water, probably in shallow pools or near hydrothermal vents where chemistry was active, where energy was available, where organic molecules could concentrate and interact and eventually organize into something that could reproduce, that could maintain itself, that could evolve. For billions of years, roughly 3 billion years, life was exclusively aquatic. Every organism that existed lived in water, evolved in water, adapted to aquatic conditions. Photosynthesis developed in the ocean. Complex cells developed in the ocean. Multicellular organisms developed in the ocean. All the fundamental innovations of life, every major evolutionary breakthrough that made modern life possible happened in water. Land was barren during this time. The continents existed but hosted no life, no plants, no animals, nothing. Just bare rock, volcanic activity, weather-eroding mountains, rivers carrying sediment to the ocean where life was happening, where evolution was generating the diversity that would eventually colonize land. About 500 million years ago, very recent in geological terms, life began moving onto land. Plants first, adapting to air, developing roots and structures to resist gravity and desiccation. Then animals, following the plants, adapting to breathe air, to support themselves against gravity, to reproduce without returning eggs to water. But these terrestrial organisms carried the ocean with them. Your cells are full of water with salt concentrations similar to seawater, maintaining internal oceans where cellular chemistry can occur. Your blood is slightly salty, containing sodium and chloride and potassium and calcium in ratios that roughly approximate seawater, that reflect oceanic origins, that work because they recreate internally the aquatic environment that cells evolved in. This is why dehydration is dangerous. It's removing the water that your cells need, that your body requires to maintain its internal ocean, that allows the chemistry of life to continue. You're fundamentally aquatic organisms that figured out how to carry water with you, how to create portable oceans inside bodies, how to live on land without leaving water entirely. Even reproduction reflects aquatic origins. Mammalian embryos develop in amniotic fluid, essentially a private ocean, salt water surrounding the developing fetus, providing the aquatic environment that development requires. Birth is emerging from water, is leaving the personal ocean of the womb, is the beginning of life in air after months of life in water. We start aquatic, every one of us, spending our first months in conditions that approximate the ocean, developing in water before we develop the ability to survive in air. The ocean isn't just where life began, it's what life is. Fundamentally, life is aquatic chemistry, is reactions that occur in water, is processes that require liquid water to function. Even terrestrial organisms are just aquatic life that learn to maintain portable oceans, to carry water environments within bodies adapted to air. Your ocean water, temporarily organized into a thinking pattern, briefly given form and consciousness, destined to return eventually to the simple molecules you're built from. But for now, for this moment, you're alive, aware, containing and being contained by the water that makes life possible. Breathing oxygen that ocean phytoplankton produced, participating in cycles that connect you to the ocean regardless of how far inland you live. The ocean provides without asking anything in return. It produces oxygen over half of what you breathe through phytoplankton photosynthesis, releases it to atmosphere, asks nothing for this service. It regulates climate-absorbing heat in summer and releasing it in winter, moderating temperature extremes, creating livable conditions across much of the planet. It dries the water, cyclically evaporating water that falls as rain on land, providing fresh water that terrestrial life depends on, enabling agriculture, filling rivers, maintaining the hydrology that makes continents habitable. The ocean absorbs carbon dioxide from atmospherically, a quarter of all carbon dioxide released by human activities, taking it out of the air, reducing the rate of climate change, slowing the accumulation of greenhouse gases even as we continue emitting them. This absorption makes the ocean gradually more acidic, harms ocean organisms, creates problems for marine ecosystems, but the ocean keeps absorbing, keeps taking up carbon, keeps providing this service even as it damages the ocean's own inhabitants. The ocean provides food fish, shellfish, seaweed feeding billions of people, providing protein where other sources are scarce, supporting coastal communities, enabling fisheries that employ millions. And it provides recreation, swimming, surfing, boating, diving, beachcombing, offering experiences, creating memories, giving people joy and relaxation and connection to nature. It provides transportation, shipping routes across oceans, moving goods between continents more efficiently than air or land transport, enabling global trade, connecting economies, making the modern world possible. It provides medicines, compounds discovered in marine organisms that treat cancer, reduce pain, fight infection, solve medical problems that terrestrial organisms didn't provide solutions for. And it provides beauty, sunsets over water, waves breaking on beaches, dolphins surfing, whales breaching, coral reefs glowing with color, all the visual and aesthetic experiences that the ocean offers freely, asks nothing for, makes available to anyone willing to look, to visit, to pay attention. All this the ocean does without consciousness, without intention, without expecting reciprocation. The ocean isn't generous in the moral sense. It doesn't choose to be giving, doesn't expect gratitude. It simply operates according to physical and biological laws. And the results of those operations happen to benefit humans enormously, happen to create services we depend on, happen to make Earth habitable and beautiful and productive. But still, there's something wonderful about this inadvertent generosity, this accidental benevolence. This way the ocean's simple functioning creates benefits beyond calculation. The oxygen you're breathing came from the ocean. The rain that fills your reservoirs came from the ocean. The moderate climate you experience instead of extreme heat and cold comes from the ocean. The fish you've eaten came from the ocean. The beauty you've witnessed came from the ocean. You're dependent on the ocean, whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you think about it or not, whether you've ever seen it or not. The ocean touches your life constantly and visibly, essentially, making things possible that would be impossible without it, providing services you don't usually notice because they're so constant, so reliable, so fundamental that they seem like background rather than gift. But they are gifts. Unintentional gifts, accidental gifts, gifts that arise from chemistry and physics rather than from kindness, but gifts nonetheless. The ocean gives constantly, abundantly, without asking for anything back. All it requires is that it continues to exist, that it remains healthy enough to function, that we don't damage it so badly that its processes fail, that its generosity can continue. Imagine now that you're floating on the ocean's surface. The water is calm, barely rippling, warm enough to be comfortable. The sun is setting, casting orange and pink across the sky, the colors reflecting in the gentle swells. You're floating easily, supported by the salt water's buoyancy, requiring no effort to stay afloat, just lying back, breathing slowly, letting the water hold you. As twilight deepens, you begin to sink. Not suddenly, not frightening, but gradually, gently, the way marine snow drifts downward through the water column. You sink slowly through the warm surface layer, feeling the water around you, aware of your gentle descent, but not concerned about it, not trying to stop it, just allowing it to happen, trusting that this sinking is safe, is natural, is where you need to go. The light fades gradually. The orange glow from the sunset above becomes dimmer as you sink deeper, passing from the bright surface layer into the twilight zone, into the dimness where light still penetrates but weakly, where colors fade to blue, where details become harder to see. You continue sinking slowly, patiently, descending through the water column as the last light fades completely. Now you're in darkness, total darkness, the kind that exists below 1,000 meters, where no sunlight reaches, where the only light is the occasional bioluminescent flash from a passing creature. But this darkness isn't frightening. It's peaceful, quiet, restful. You continue sinking through it, through water that's becoming colder but not uncomfortably so, through pressure that's increasing but that you don't notice, because your body is adjusting, adapting, becoming comfortable at depth. The sounds of the surface world have faded completely. There's no wind noise, no wave sound, just the occasional distant call of a whale. The faint click of a hunting sperm whale miles away sounds so rare and quiet that they emphasize the silence more than they break it. You're approaching the deep ocean's profound quiet, the stillness that exists, where almost nothing moves, where activity has slowed to near zero, where rest is the dominant state. You sink past the twilight zone, past the midnight zone, approaching the abyssal depths, sinking toward the seafloor, thousands of meters below the surface. The cold is numbing now, but in a good way, in a way that slows your thinking, that quiets your mind, that reduces mental activity to near nothing. The pressure is immense, but it's holding you, supporting you, surrounding you completely, making you feel contained, protected, held by the water's weight. Finally, you settle onto the soft sediment of the deep sea floor. You're at the bottom now, at the deepest point of your descent, at the place of maximum rest, maximum stillness, maximum peace. The darkness is complete. The silence is profound. The cold has slowed everything to near stillness. The pressure holds you gently but firmly. Nothing disturbs this depth. Nothing demands your attention. Nothing requires your response. You've arrived at the deepest rest, the most complete sleep, the state where consciousness fades entirely, where dreams become the only reality, where time doesn't matter because you're so deep that the surface world can't reach you, where you're held by the ocean's deepest embrace, supported by water and darkness and cold and pressure, resting in the peace that exists only at the greatest depths. Sleep now. You've descended as far as necessary. You're at the deepest point, the safest depth, the place where rest is complete and restoration begins. The ocean holds you. The darkness surrounds you. The cold preserves you. The pressure supports you. And the silence allows you to finally, completely, deeply rest. Sleep now in the ocean's depths. Let the water hold you through the night. Let the darkness protect you from disturbance. Let the cold slow your metabolism to the pace of deep-sea organisms that live patient lives in profound stillness. Let the pressure create boundaries that nothing can cross, that keep you safe, that define the space where you rest. The ocean breathes with you, its tides rising and falling like your chest, rising and falling, its currents flowing like your blood flowing, its depths corresponding to your deepening sleep. You're part of the ocean now, temporarily, for these hours of rest. You're held by something ancient and vast and patient, something that has cradled life for billions of years, that knows how to hold sleeping things, that will keep you safe through darkness and release you gently when morning comes. That's hours away. For now, there's only this, the deep ocean's embrace, the profound darkness, the perfect stillness, the complete rest. Sleep.